Chapter 568. Going Against the Flow. 5K is coming. In the process of creating the life, death, rise, and fall technique, Luo Fan had already cultivated this technique once. Unfortunately, although this technique could greatly reduce the cultivation required to travel through time, it was still not something that Luo Fan could support with his current cultivation realm. According to his deduction, his cultivation needed to be improved at least before he could travel between different times in the primordial world. It's a pity that it's a trick after all. If I can't attain the Zenith Heaven Dao fruit, even if I can use it, I can only travel within 1 yuan hui, and I can't move freely. Luo Fan sighed. Moving time and speeding up or slowing down the flow of time seemed to be controlling time, and it seemed to be not much different from traveling through the river of time. But in reality, moving time and speeding up or slowing down the flow of time, no matter how many times it increased or slowed down, was completely different from controlling time. The difference between the two was like the difference between heaven and earth, because no matter how time was moved, it could only be moved in the direction of the flow of time, and it could only change the speed of the flow of time in its original direction. On the other hand, controlling time and freely traveling between the past and the future of time was to transcend time and jump out of the restrictions of time. Not only could it travel in the direction of the flow of time, it could also go against the flow of time. It could even go against the flow of time, and in the end, it could even reverse the river of time. The difference between the two could be imagined. It was precisely because of this that the difficulty of traveling freely through time was so great. It caused Luo Fan, who had just attained the earthly immortal Dao fruit and could refine a treasure that could move time like the limitless void palace, to be unable to go against time and travel even for a second, even when his Tai Dao fruit was about to be perfected. With a thought, Luo Fan casually sent the sundial into the 3001st world below the strange hall. The sundial was materialized from the rise and fall technique. It naturally contained the secrets of time and space, and it possessed all sorts of mysterious functions. After it was sent into the 3001st worlds, it naturally emitted a mysterious aura and connected with every world, causing the structure of the 3001st worlds to become more stable. The different changes in the flow of time between the worlds became smoother, and it no longer felt abrupt. There were countless living beings in the 3001st worlds. When the sundial entered the gap between the 3001st worlds, the countless living beings had different senses. However, it was only a sense. Even the living beings with the strongest senses could not tell what exactly had happened in the world they were in. They could not even tell what the changes were from. After all, even the current Luo Fan couldn't explain the way of time clearly, let alone the countless living beings who were diligently striving to survive in the world that Luo Fan had created. Seeing this, Luo Fan was slightly delighted. Just as he was about to take another step, he suddenly felt an invisible, strange fluctuation coming from a minor kiliacosm among the 3001st worlds. The Void Wuji Palace was one with Luo Fan, so all the changes in it could not escape his senses. The moment he sensed the fluctuation, Luo Fan tracked the source of the fluctuation. It was the minor kiliacosm where Tao Xiaolin was. The fluctuation was extremely strange, and it emitted a faint aura of time. It was extremely obscure and illusory. If it were not for Luo Fan, even if his mind was one with the Void Wuji Palace, he would have ignored this strange fluctuation. The moment he sensed the fluctuation, Luo Fan analyzed it millions of times in the next 1/1000th of a second. Almost at the same time, he roughly knew what the fluctuation represented. It's time travel. This thought suddenly flashed in Luo Fan's mind. With a thought, a huge ball of light appeared out of thin air above his head. Inside this ball of light, there were countless lights and shadows flashing rapidly. This was the appearance of the minor kiliacosm. His eyes were fixed, and the gold and silver brilliance in his pupils flickered. In an instant, he had locked on to the source of the fluctuation. It was a small village in the mortal world. At this moment, the clear, and resounding cries of a baby shook the heavens and the earth. The hundreds of families in the small village all cast their gazes towards a wooden house in the east of the village, and their faces more or less revealed expressions of envy. The wooden house in the east of the village was dimly lit. It was the place where the cry of the baby came from. Luo Fan's eyes saw through everything and saw a faintly discernible yellow brilliance coming from the wooden house. The source was a newborn baby. There's another one. Luo Fan's eyes flashed. In an instant, time flowed back. With the wooden house as the center, the time of the entire minor kiliocosm began to flow back. That strange fluctuation was slowed down by tens of thousands of times before it reappeared in his eyes. He saw an inexplicable existence that far surpassed the supreme great way suddenly tremble, showing a little insignificant power. And it was this insignificant power that directly broke the supreme great way of the untainted world, the Wuji Palace of the Void and the minor kiliocosm. It directly sent an invisible true spirit into the minor kiliocosm. After the true spirit entered the minor kiliocosm, it directly moved space and threw itself into the belly of the pregnant woman. It carried out some extremely complicated and mysterious strange reaction. In the end, it turned into a violent movement, causing a reaction from the pregnant woman, and the baby was born. The fluctuation that caused Luo Fan's reaction was caused by the true spirit moving space into the pregnant woman's belly. How many billions of years has it been since a time traveler came here? Now it's only been a few yuan hui, and two have come in a row. Luo Fan's heart moved. He lifted his foot and took a light step. His figure directly stepped into the spirit space and hung high above the wooden house. He looked down and directly passed through the layers of barriers, seeing the baby crying loudly with his mouth open. Newborn babies would cry, but the cries of ordinary babies would only shake the roof tiles at most. However, the cries of this baby were like thunder that resounded through the sky. They were so loud that everyone in the village could hear them clearly. At the same time, they clearly understood how healthy the baby was. The family was so happy that they couldn't sit still. There were people rushing inside and outside the house. Luo Fan hung high in the void, looking down at the baby. The yellow light emitted from the baby's body, and it was fading in an extremely fast speed, as if it was quickly merging with the baby. If the yellow light completely disappeared into the baby's body, even Luo Fan would not be able to find any traces of a foreign true spirit on the baby's body. However, at this time, it had not completely merged. With a thought from Luo Fan, he casually made a grabbing motion, and an invisible brilliance shrouded the infant. In an instant, a faint figure slowly floated out from the top of the baby's head. This figure was the figure of a young man. His figure and appearance were ordinary, and he wore an ancient Chinese Han costume. His face was rather pale, and his body was not very muscular. In fact, he could even be said to be thin and weak. At this time, this person was curled up, as if he was in a mother's womb. His face was calm and serene, as if he had fallen into a deep state of sleep. Luo Fan did not bother to communicate with this person. With a wave of his hand, countless rays of light burst out from the top of the person's head, instantly forming a light shadow in the void. The image in a light shadow was unpredictable, but it perfectly displayed a person's life experience at an unimaginable speed. I see. With one look, Luo Fan understood this person's origin. This person was also from Earth. However, he did not intend to come over. At this time, he did not even know that he had transmigrated and thought that he was just reincarnating. This person was an elementary scholar in ancient Huaxia. When he was young, he was too excited and drank too much wine. His heart could not take it, and he died on the spot. The happy event turned into a funeral. Everything was considered normal at this point. After that, it was a person that Luo Fan was very familiar with that appeared. The mysterious person who had sent Tao Xiaolin over appeared again and grabbed the elementary scholar's soul. With a wave of his hand, true fire was emitted from his hand and wrapped around the elementary scholar's soul, refining it into a higher level of true spirit. Then, he opened up a space-time tunnel and sent the elementary scholar over like Tao Xiaolin. What is the meaning of this? Luo Fan understood, and his eyebrows furrowed. This person's actions were really puzzling. With this person's ability, if he wanted to transmigrate over, it would not be difficult. However, he sent people over one after another, and did not do anything else. He did not even come over himself. What was his purpose? It couldn't be that he came on a whim and was just playing around, right? Even if he wanted to play, it would only be fun if he could see the result. Let me see what you want to do. With a thought, Luo Fan tore open the void, and a long space-time crack appeared out of thin air. This minor kiliocosm was one of the 3,000 minor kiliocosms in the Void Wuji Palace. Although it was attached to the untainted world, it was much weaker than the untainted world. Therefore, although Luo Fan could not tear the space-time of the untainted world at will, he still had a considerable ability to deal with the space-time of this minor kiliocosm. Especially at this time, he had already cultivated the rise and fall technique, so it was naturally easier for him to deal with it. In an instant, time flowed backward, and between the space-time distortion, an invisible space-time crack appeared out of thin air. This was the space-time tunnel that the figure had come to this minor kiliocosm through. It was also similar to the space-time tunnel that Tao Xiaolin had come through. The reason why he could summon the space-time tunnel was not because Luo Fan could use the rise and fall technique to naturally travel between space-time, but because the space-time tunnel itself still had a faint trace left in this minor kiliocosm. The Supreme Great Way itself was traceless. One had to rely on great wisdom, great way, and spiritual power to comprehend it in order to perceive it. The inexplicable existence that was far higher than the Supreme Great Way was naturally more difficult to find than the Supreme Great Way, and more mysterious. Although Luo Fan knew that the figure could only come here because of the existence that was more mysterious than the Supreme Great Way, he could not find that mysterious existence at all. All he could find was the performance of the inexplicable existence that had changed hands a few times, which was the space-time tunnel in front of him. The moment the space-time tunnel appeared, Luo Fan felt an indescribable pressure emanating from the tunnel. The entire minor kiliocosm, the medium-sized world above the minor kiliocosm, and even the entire Void Wuji Palace began to tremble slightly. It was as if they had suddenly swallowed a huge existence that they could not bear and could collapse into powder at any time, completely disappearing between heaven and earth. Luo Fan instantly understood that this was because the power of the space-time tunnel was far beyond the endurance of the minor kiliocosm and the medium-sized world. Perhaps it was because of this that the space-time tunnel that originally led to the untainted world branched out in this minor kiliocosm, allowing the two time travelers to pass through this minor kiliocosm. Understanding this, Luo Fan already understood why the mysterious person did not personally pass through the space-time tunnel, but sent ordinary people over one after another. The reason was that the power of the space-time tunnel was too strong, so strong that the mysterious person was not willing to take the risk to pass through, or even to the extent that it was impossible for him to take the risk to pass through. Suddenly, a flash of lightning flashed in Luo Fan's mind. Yes, I felt a little strange before. So that's why. Luo Fan's mind flashed like lightning, and his eyes revealed a look of sudden enlightenment. Previously, when he knew that there was a time traveler like Tao Xiaolin in this minor kiliocosm, he could not help but have the idea of studying that time traveler. After knowing that the time traveler was sent over by a mysterious person, he had the idea of that mysterious person again. Although it seemed that he was attracted by the mysterious person's mysterious supernatural power and had the idea of studying it. Previously, Luo Fan also thought so. He thought that he was happy to see the supernatural power and wanted to study it. However, it was only at this moment that he came to a sudden realization. It turned out that these were all just appearances. The most fundamental reason for all of this was that he thought of himself from Tao Xiaolin. He, too, had transmigrated from Earth. The reason why Tao Xiaolin attracted his attention was that deep in his subconscious, he wanted to find a reason why he came from Earth to this untainted world from Tao Xiaolin. And this was the reason why he was interested in the mysterious person. It seems that I was most likely sent to the untainted world by that mysterious person. As for this Tao Zhaolin and this Xiao Tsai, if I hadn't refined the limitless void palace, I'm afraid they would have directly appeared in the chaos world. At Luo Fan's level, he had already seen through all kinds of things like vanity. Therefore, even if he admitted that his experience was almost controlled by someone else, he would not ignore the existence of all kinds of signs. At this moment, all kinds of thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind at an incomparably fast speed. When he finished thinking about all these, the space-time tunnel stabilized itself. Since the mysterious person was unwilling or afraid to pass through the space-time tunnel, Luo Fan naturally would not be so unwise as to let his body take the risk. With a thought, he casually pointed, and a thought rushed out of his hand, instantly rushing into the space-time tunnel. Boundless power was emitted from the tunnel itself, crazily pressing towards Luo Fan's thought. In the blink of an eye, it directly blasted into the inside of the thought, instantly destroying the structure of the thought. At this moment, Luo Fan had already achieved perfection in the Tai Dao fruit. Every bit of his thought was integrated into one. Even if it was completely separated from his body, he could still grow into an itinerant immortal realm cultivator who had achieved the earth immortal Dao fruit. However, at this moment, under the powerful effect of the tunnel itself, the interior of Luo Fan's thought was like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, instantly destroying more than 99% of it. And all the power contained in the thought was completely erased in an instant. Its connection with Luo Fan's body became extremely weak in the process of erasing. If not for Luo Fan's absolute control over the thought would have completely left him and become an independent entity. So that's the reason. At this moment, Luo Fan finally completely understood why the mysterious person did not send the thought himself, but could only send an ordinary creature over. With this weak sense, Luo Fan sent the thought along the space-time tunnel straight to the source. On this side, after the thought entered the space-time tunnel in the mini-kiliocosm, it finally could not continue to be maintained. With a shake and a distortion, it disappeared without a trace. With its disappearance, the entire Void Wuji Palace suddenly disappeared, as if it had never appeared. The thought shuttled through the space-time tunnel without any sense of time. It seemed like thousands of years had passed, but also like an instant. A bit of colorful brilliance that was different from the tunnel light appeared in the endless depths of the space-time tunnel. Although Luo Fan's thought was 99% destroyed, and even all its power was erased, it was still Luo Fan's thought after all. Its natural aptitude was supreme, its thinking ability was extremely complete, and its reasoning ability was not damaged at all. Seeing this bit of different light, he knew that it was close to the source of the space-time tunnel. After an unknown period of time, the light became brighter and more obvious. Finally, it occupied the entire front of the tunnel, like an overwhelming wall of light. An aura that was completely different from the space-time tunnel came out from behind the wall of light. This aura made Luo Fan feel very familiar, but at the same time, it was also very strange. It seemed to have an incomparably fresh feeling, but compared to the untainted land, the medium kiliocosm, and even the mini kiliocosm that was first opened, it was so turbid. In front, it should be the Earth hundreds of years before I transmigrated. As Luo Fan thought of this, he could not help but feel a little excited. At the same time, in the mini kiliocosm inside the Void Wuji Palace, Luo Fan had already erased all the memories of the person who looked like a scholar. Then, he sent the soul back into the baby's body. The reason why he did this was not that Luo Fan was afraid that other people had memories from the Earth, nor was he afraid that they would cultivate too fast with memories, and one day they might surpass him. Having cultivated to this stage, Luo Fan's will was as unmovable as a rock. How could he have such thoughts? Chapter 569. Condense of physical body luck was formed by the supreme great Tao of the primordial world. If someone possessed extraordinary wisdom and knowledge, They would naturally be able to make better use of the various conveniences that the world had given them. What they showed was that their luck would be even greater, regardless of whether this creature's memory came from Earth. As long as this creature was born with extraordinary wisdom, it would be much more intelligent than others, and its luck would also be much greater than others. If these memories came from a perfect world, and even contained knowledge that was extremely beneficial to cultivation, such as Confucian scriptures and Taoist scriptures, it would have an even greater effect on the promotion of providence, and it might even cause disturbances to the providence ocean of the entire Void Wuji Palace. And this was something that Luo Fan could not sit back and watch. As expected, as the memory was erased, the extraordinary luck that emerged from the baby's body instantly dissipated. What appeared was that although the baby's cry was still as loud as before, it did not seem to be as shocking as before. It also did not have the feeling of a strange phenomenon appearing at first glance. Seeing this, Luo Fan could not be bothered to care about anything else. He lifted his foot and stepped out of the spirit Kiliacosm. He arrived at the platform where he originally cultivated and sat down cross-legged. The light ball that had materialized from the spirit Kiliacosm gradually disappeared after Luo Fan did not move. The strange hall became quiet again. Luo Fan closed his eyes and guarded the mysterious feeling that was transmitted to him through some incredible channel. That feeling came from the thought that he had sent into the space-time tunnel. If that thought had not been destroyed by the space-time tunnel, Luo Fan might have been able to directly descend with his mind and directly control that thought like he controlled his body. It would not have been like this, where he could only vaguely sense it now. It's almost the end of the space-time tunnel. Is Earth in front of me? Luo Fan thought to himself, using all his ability to sense the changes around the thought. The thought slammed into the light screen. In an instant, an indescribable strange feeling suddenly appeared in Luo Fan's mind. It was as if the infinite river of time was pouring past him like a waterfall, and there was an infinite space flashing in front of him. All of a sudden, the thin acquired heaven and earth's yuan qi rushed toward him. For Luo Fan, who usually casually absorbed primal chaos origin qi and was picky about innate origin qi, the Hotian origin qi was simply like a stinking ditch. It suddenly choked Luo Fan's thoughts and shook, and he almost couldn't bear it and collapsed. It really is Earth. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. The thought swayed slightly, and an invisible force was generated out of nowhere, completely isolating the thought from the acquired natural energies in the surroundings, preventing it from being tainted by any of them. After doing all this thought finally had the time to look around. An incomparably familiar, yet incomparably strange feeling instantly welled up in Luo Fan's heart. The clear sky, the space that was many times more fragile than the primordial world, the vitality that was many times thinner than the primordial world, the sky that was many times lower than the primordial world, and the ground that seemed to be able to completely shatter with a single step, made Luo Fan understand that this was no longer the primordial world. Although the power contained in Luo Fan's thought had been completely erased, it was still Luo Fan's thought after all. His comprehension of the supreme, great Tao and his understanding of power were still at the peak of the primordial world. Since he had already confirmed that this was his destination, he no longer cared about the displeasure that the surrounding acquired heaven and earth's yuan qi, which was like a stinking ditch, brought him. With a thought, the power that enveloped him suddenly changed its appearance. Countless mysterious and unfathomable three-dimensional talismans quickly formed on this power. They continuously linked together, forming an extremely small but complicated array formation that could only be described clearly if it was unfolded. After the array formation was formed, an indescribable attractive force appeared out of nowhere. The acquired heaven and earth's yuan qi within a radius of 500 kilometers quickly condensed towards the array formation like a waterfall. In the blink of an eye, a huge vortex was formed. In the blink of an eye, the wind and clouds surged in the sky. Under the rapid flow of the acquired qi, the originally cloudless void condensed countless water vapor, forming a huge vortex-like cloud. The more the cloud gathered, the denser it became. In the end, it became as black as ink. From afar, it looked like a black pot lid had fallen from the sky and covered the entire sky. The place where Luo Fan's thought appeared was on a barren mountain. The nearest residence was at least 100 miles away. This distance could be covered in the blink of an eye in the primordial world, or even in the minor chiliocosm. It could only be considered a close neighbor. However, here on Earth, such a distance was already considered quite far. At least, no one in the village 100 kilometers away had noticed Luo Fan's huge formation. Only the birds and beasts in the barren mountain felt strange, but they did not dare to move too much. They only dared to hide far away. They only felt that the heavens were angry and that the world was about to be destroyed. Luo Fan's movements were not slow. After 10 minutes, he had absorbed enough acquired heaven and Earth's yuan qi and stopped the powerful pulling force of the array formation. Although he no longer cared about the displeasure brought by the acquired heaven and Earth's yuan qi, Luo Fan did not plan to directly use it. After all, compared to what he was going to do next, the acquired heaven and Earth's yuan qi was too low level. It was not enough to achieve his goal. With a slight thought, the formation suddenly changed, changing from external to internal. After 10 minutes of absorption, at this moment, the position where Luo Fan's thought was located had been replaced by a solid energy ball with a diameter of 30 meters. This energy ball was filled with rich acquired heaven and Earth's yuan qi. If the cultivators on Earth saw it, they would probably be willing to go bankrupt in exchange for even a little bit of it. In the center of this energy ball, there was an insignificant speck that looked like a speck of dust. It was a complicated formation that Luo Fan had casually condensed. At this moment, the formation suddenly lit up. Countless tiny lines, like the thorns of a hedgehog, suddenly spewed out from the tiny formation, directly piercing into every direction of the solid yuan qi ball. In an instant, the solid yuan qi ball was completely filled, causing countless tiny cracks to suddenly appear on the inside of the solid yuan qi ball. Then, the tiny lines suddenly lit up, as if they had turned into countless thread-like black holes. They frantically swallowed the solid energy ball, causing it to quickly become sparse and shrink as if it was deflating. After a few breaths, the solid energy ball had completely disappeared. Only the countless radioactive lines were left in the void, slightly twisting and swaying. This process lasted for a full 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, these lines suddenly shook, and countless yuan qi that had gone through some kind of change and seemed to have lost its essence gushed out from these countless lines, forming a thick mist that did not disperse and wrapped up the area within a radius of 1,000 feet. And inside this fog, at this moment, the countless lines had become crystal clear as if they were real lines, and there was also a dense Sciention aura being emitted from them. As soon as this Sciention aura appeared, the dark clouds in the sky that were condensed from water vapor suddenly seemed to be stirred by an indescribable force and suddenly began to churn violently. Muffled rumbles continuously came from the center of the dark clouds. Flashes of lightning appeared out of nowhere. For the earth that had completely transformed into the Hotian realm, the appearance of Sciention aura was a huge heaven-defying thing. And this heaven-defying thing would naturally be bombarded by the lightning of the world. In a few breaths, the dark clouds in the sky had brewed to the limit. Kaboom! With a loud sound, a lightning snake suddenly gushed out from the dark clouds in the sky, fiercely striking down at the center of the fog. The fog was the residue formed by the various impurities that Luo Fan had removed from the Hotian world's yuan qi. In fact, it was also a kind of power. Moreover, it was a kind of power that was most afraid of the lightning of the world. The moment the lightning struck the fog, it was like dry grass that had been ignited by sparks. With a bang, it suddenly erupted with incomparably fierce flames. These flames were so blue that even the rocks and plants below couldn't withstand them. They were immediately set ablaze by the blue flames. Scorching hot magma flowed where the flames passed, and the surrounding temperature rose rapidly. This place was originally autumn and winter, But at this moment, under the magma flames, it was as if it was midsummer. This place was originally a valley, but at this moment, it was like a sea of magma and fire. The lightning did not stop. After igniting the fog, it continued to move in. In the blink of an eye, it had already struck the array in the center. "You came at the right time." Luo Fan's voice came from the array. Luo Fan had lived in the primordial world for hundreds of millions of years, and had long been used to everything in the primordial world. Although the lightning could ignite the fog and form a flame that could burn everything, Luo Fan did not care about its strength at all. Compared to the lightning in the primordial world's astral wind, thunder, and fire layer, compared to the lightning that appeared during the heavenly tribulation, and even compared to the lightning that he released using his supernatural power, it was unbearably weak. Such lightning was even a little too weak to scratch an itch for him. How could he take it seriously? On the contrary, the lightning had just been formed. Although it still belonged to the postnatal realm, it was closer to the connate realm, and it was even easier to cultivate to the connate realm. It could be said that in Luo Fan's eyes, the lightning was not coming to hit him, but to deliver itself to him. Immediately, hundreds of lines from the array suddenly turned, condensed in the void, and grabbed the lightning as if it was an entity. With a suction, the lightning was sucked into the line, and with another spurt, the postnatal dregs were spat out, and the congenital essence refined, and it was absorbed into the line like the postnatal primordial chi. As the congenital essence increased, the reaction of the dark clouds above became more and more intense. The lightning was endless, striking down one after another, constantly striking into the blue flames. They were grabbed by the lines, absorbed, and turned into congenital essence so that the lines kept changing. Another 10 minutes passed. The dark clouds above had already become incomparably thin. From the looks of it, there was only a thin layer left. However, all the water vapor within the thousands of lightning bolts from before had evaporated due to the lightning and dispersed once again. Only the water vapor that had yet to evaporate and disperse was left. Luo Fan sensed slightly and knew that the lightning had come to an end. With a thought, the countless lines suddenly retracted, like a turtle withdrawing its head, and instantly rushed back to the array. With a turn, they completely drilled into the array. The array looked like a speck of dust, but it was, after all, an extremely complicated and mysterious array. It was impossible for the inside to look the same as the outside. In fact, there was a space with a circumference of 100 feet inside. This space was hazy, and it was filled with endless clear fog. This fog emitted an incomparably dense congenital aura, and there were even traces of lightning that were constantly moving around like divine dragons. This was the congenital essence that Luo Fan had refined from the postnatal primordial chi and the lightning that struck down from the sky, using his own physical strength and divine power. Although the quantity is a little small, it's barely enough. A thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. Then, the congenital essence that filled the circumference of 100 feet violently surged and constantly condensed towards the center. A skeleton that looked like white jade was the first to appear. Then, strands of muscles slowly grew on the white jade skeleton, followed by blood vessels, tendons, organs, skin, and finally soft jet black hair. In just a few breaths, a lifelike Luo Fan, who looked like his original body, had already appeared within 100 feet of the void within the array. At this time, Luo Fan was completely naked, and he sat cross-legged in the void. From the looks of it, it was no different from his original body, and the lines on his skin seemed to be formed by real flesh and blood. Still too weak. Luo Fan sighed. With a casual grab, the surrounding array suddenly collapsed, and then suddenly condensed into a long robe that wrapped around his body. The surrounding flames were formed by burning the postnatal dregs in the postnatal primordial chi of heaven and earth. Although the postnatal primordial chi of heaven and earth gathered in one place as fuel, it was water without a source after all. After burning for such a long time, it had unknowingly burned out. Even the burning earth, trees, and rocks below had solidified into lava. Luo Fan, who was wearing a cyan robe, floated in the void. He raised his head and looked at the incomparably clear, starry sky above him, which he had never paid attention to before. Suddenly, a feeling of the vicissitudes of life arose in his heart. With a thought, his figure instantly disappeared from where he was. When he reappeared, he was already in the village that was 100 miles away. The gap between the earth and the untainted world had reached an unimaginable level. At this time, this body of Luo fans was only equivalent to the cultivation of an individual immortal, but could already tear the space apart at will, and a distance of millions of miles was nothing to him. At this time, there were not many villagers in the village, but not few either. Luo Fan did not hide his appearance at all, so immediately, an old man in his 60s came forward and asked, "Where did this scholar come from, and where do you plan to go? Why did you pass by our young village? Our village is located in a remote area, and few people have come here for decades." When Luo Fan heard this, he knew that this old man thought that he walked into this village like a normal person, but he just thought that he did not notice the way he appeared. He did not expose him, but cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, sir. I entered the mountain to play and got lost. May I know where this place is, and how far is it from the big city?" "Ha, you scholars are so elegant. This mountain has no name, but for dozens of generations of our village, we have called it Monk Peak. We have lived here for dozens of generations. Where have we heard of any scenic spots or historical sites? What is there to play about? But if you want to ask about the big city, follow this mountain road for a day and a night, and you will reach Handan City." "Thank you, sir. So this place is so close to Handan City. Looks like I have not gone far." Luo Fan said with a smile, "Since the scholar is already here, why don't you come to my house and have a cup of tea? Murano Yamato, although he does not have anything good, he will not forget to treat his guests." The old man laughed. Luo Fan wanted to know what time it was, so he did not refuse, thanked for a while, and followed the old man back. The old man nagged along the way, either asking about Luo Fan's experience or talking about the scenery nearby. In the midst of his nagging, Luo Fan finally understood what he wanted to know. The time now was the Northern Song Dynasty, a full 1,000 years since Luo Fan transmigrated. The current emperor was the founding emperor of the Northern Song Dynasty, Zhao Kuangyin. Zhao Kuangyin was now wholeheartedly on a northern expedition to recover the 16 states of Yin and Yun. It was precisely because of this that this old man was somewhat worried and happy at the same time. He was worried that there would be a war, and things were a little troublesome, but he was happy that the country was strong and might really recover the 16 states of Yin and Yun. After listening for a while, Luo Fan already had a plan in his heart. The space-time on Earth was many times weaker than the space-time of the untainted world. In the untainted world, even with his body's Tai Dao fruit, which was about to be perfected, he could not freely travel through space-time. However, on Earth, even if his current body only had the cultivation of the individual immortal realm, and he had not even refined the Dharma power in his body, he could easily use the magical power of space-time travel and freely travel between the past and the future. However, although he could do it, he still needed to have the power to track down the mysterious man. Otherwise, if the mysterious man's cultivation exceeded the individual immortal realm, wouldn't his body be sending itself to the door if he chased after him? How could he achieve his goal of tracking down the truth? Chapter 570. Buddhism and Taoism. After leaving the old man's house, Luo Fan carefully sensed for a while. Then he took a step forward and crossed 100 miles in an instant, arriving in Handan City. Although it was a famous historical city, it was still in ancient times. It was very different from modern times. It was more dirty and messy. At the same time, there were fewer people living there than in modern times. With a slight thought, Luo Fan arrived at an inn. He hadn't thought about it before, but when he arrived at this place where people lived, Luo Fan just remembered that he hadn't eaten anything for hundreds of millions of years. At this time, with a sudden impulse, it was as if he wanted to taste it again. After ordering some of the inn's specialties, Luo Fan ate while listening to the conversations of the customers around him. By the way, the current successor of the Mount Shu sect is now in Handan City. Have you seen him, old Wang? A customer said to his companion with a smile. Isn't that nonsense? He's a sword immortal. How can ordinary people like us possibly see him? Don't expect too much. Let's talk about the girls in Spring Flower Brothel. It's more realistic, the customer's companion said disdainfully. Haha, as the saying goes, a toad that doesn't want to eat a swan is not a good toad. Although it's impossible for us to interact with a sword immortal, it's not against the law to talk about it. The customer shook his head and laughed indifferently. That's not necessarily true. I heard that sword immortals all have incredible abilities. Maybe if we talk about them here, they will know immediately. I don't want to lose my life because of a slip of the tongue. The customer's companion obviously didn't agree with his companion's view. The customer seemed to suddenly understand, and a look of hesitation appeared on his face. Since both sides had misgivings, this topic naturally couldn't continue. The next topic naturally turned to which girl in Spring Flower Brothel was better in bed, which girl was more interesting, which girl had a better price for a night, and so on. Sword immortals. It seems that there are also cultivators on Earth. Listening to the conversation of the customer, Luo Fan's curiosity was piqued. At this time on Earth, he was only an incarnation condensed by a little thought. Even if he lost it, it was just a little thought. For Luo Fan, it was not a loss at all. In addition, in the current state of Earth, the cultivation of the individual immortals was probably far higher than the highest level of the cultivation world on Earth. Therefore, Luo Fan didn't have any worries. Since he felt curious about the cultivation world, he took action. However, taking action didn't mean that Luo Fan had to go in person to find the so-called successor of Shu Sect. He continued to eat, but only slightly relaxed his control over his own power. The aura around him suddenly exploded, and an invisible aura shot up into the sky, instantly scattering the sparse clouds in the sky. This aura had already far exceeded the limits of what an ordinary person could sense. Therefore, even though there was such an extremely strong aura, the surrounding customers only felt that the surrounding atmosphere seemed to have changed a little, but they could not find the source of this change. They couldn't even notice that the surroundings were shrouded in a force that could crush all of them into minced meat with just a little movement. This huge and vast force didn't cover a wide area, and it only affected Handan City. It could be said that if there were cultivators in Handan City, they would definitely be able to discover it and then find Luo Fan. This was Luo Fan's method, to make the person he wanted to see come to his door and meet him personally. Luo Fan leisurely ate his wine and dishes. Because of his imposing manner, the surroundings had unknowingly become quiet. Although the drinkers and waiters didn't know what was going on, they were in a depressed mood and didn't have much of a mind to chat. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, a leisurely sword light landed in front of the inn. Following that, a handsome young man with eyes like stars, a face like the full moon, and eyebrows like swords appeared. However, at this time, there was a deeply hidden worry and confusion on the young man's face, and cold sweat kept appearing. After this person appeared, he took a closer look and walked directly towards Luo Fan's table. Shu Mountain disciple Zhang Jian greets Senior. I didn't know that Senior would come and didn't welcome you personally. Please forgive me, Senior. The handsome young man bowed to Luo Fan. The customers and waiters around were originally surprised that this person arrived on a sword light. Now that they saw this person being so respectful to a young man who was eating and drinking with them, they couldn't help but be shocked, and their faces showed expressions of disbelief. However, this young man was an immortal in their eyes. How would they dare to speak out of turn? Even if they were curious, they didn't dare to show too much surprise. Bill. For a moment, the sound of people paying their bills rang out. After a short while, only Luo Fan and the young man were left in the inn. Even the waiters and innkeepers found an exit and left the inn. What great power! Luo Fan sighed as he saw all of this. When a young man heard Luo Fan's name, he could no longer hide the cold sweat on his face. Never mind, I just came here randomly. Sit down. Luo Fan saw the young man's appearance and shook his head. Yes. The young man didn't dare to decline, and he didn't dare to say anything polite like, how can there be a seat in front of Senior? He carefully sat down across from Luo Fan. Although Luo Fan's body had just condensed, and the core was only a thought, his cultivation level was so high that it had far surpassed the cultivation world on Earth. Thus, with a flash of his eyes, he saw through the young man's cultivation level, cultivation method, and even the cultivation culture behind the cultivation method. He didn't miss anything. The cultivation level of the cultivator before him was only equivalent to the Qi refinement realm. In the primordial world, even the weakest living being had just been born. Compared to the bodies of ordinary people on Earth, the young man's body was at least 100 times stronger. There was also a power called spiritual essence circulating within his body. In his dantian, a 3-foot-long sword floated in the spiritual essence. It was constantly being refined by the spiritual essence, constantly deepening the connection between it and the young man's body. "What cultivation level are you at now?" Luo Fan asked casually. "Your disciple is dull. I've cultivated for 40 years, but I'm only at the ethereal opening realm. I'm still 2 realms away from the Golden Dan's path of immortality." The Shushan disciple didn't dare to be negligent. "So this realm is called the ethereal opening realm. This name is quite appropriate." Luo Fan's heart moved. With just a glance, he knew the specific cultivation method of the young man. He also knew that the young man's cultivation level was only at the middle level of the public cultivation method. He also knew that the final result of this cultivation method was to cultivate a golden Dan that could bear everything in life. However, although he saw through it, he didn't know what the different realms of this cultivation method were called. Ethereal opening, I'm afraid there's a yin spirit. Next, there must be a yang spirit, followed by the thunder tribulation to wash the body and the yang spirit. Only then can the essence of life be condensed into a golden Dan and finally achieve the effect of immortality. However, such longevity can only last for 3,000 years at most. After 3,000 years, the heavenly decay will occur and all the essence of life will be consumed. Luo Fan thought to himself, "I haven't been out for hundreds of years. Tell me about the current situation of the cultivation world in the Divine Prefecture." Luo Fan nodded and asked, "Yes." The young man's eyes flashed, and a look of understanding appeared on his face. As he spoke, his mood seemed to be a lot more relaxed. Even the cold sweat gradually disappeared. Obviously, he thought that Luo Fan wouldn't harm him anymore. This Zhang Jian was the most outstanding disciple of this generation in Shushan. He went to the mountain to cultivate at the age of 8, and it had been 43 years since then. With such a cultivation age, he was able to condense a yin spirit, step into the ethereal opening realm, and fly on a sword. In the entire cultivation world, he was an extraordinary genius. This time he went down the mountain because the elders of the sect thought that he had enough ability to make a name for himself in the cultivation world of the Divine Prefecture and bring Shushan to greater heights. And the previous year of travel also proved this point. The name of Shushan's current successor, Zhang Jian, had become the representative of the Shushan sect and the name of justice. The compliments along the way made Zhang Jian feel as if he was floating. Although he didn't dare to think that he was invincible in the world, he also thought that the number of people in the younger generation who could compare to him was definitely not more than one hand. However, today when he came to Handan City to visit the family of a junior sister who had asked him to take care of, he suddenly felt a sudden aura that was thousands of times stronger than even the most powerful sect leader of his sect suddenly appeared, almost suppressing him to the point that he didn't dare to move. After all, this Zhang Jian had been practicing for a year. Although he didn't have much experience, he already had some. After thinking about it, he knew that there was a powerful senior who was summoning him. After understanding this, although he was very uneasy, he could only bite the bullet and come to meet that person. And after seeing that person, Zhang Jian, who had a trace of wishful thinking in his heart, was completely in despair. Luo Fan simply sat there, simply exuding a faint aura, but in the eyes of Zhang Jian, it was as towering as the world's highest peak, Mount Everest, which he saw a few months ago. It made him feel that he was just an extremely weak ant, and as long as the person was in a bad mood, his soul would fly away and he would never be able to reincarnate. It was this feeling that made Zhang Jian, who was originally arrogant and thought that he was already one of the top masters in the world, behave so obediently and so obediently. If there were others who were Zhang Jian's people and saw Zhang Jian's behavior at this time, they would definitely suspect whether the Zhang Jian in front of them was an imposter. In front of his own master and sect leader, Zhang Jian had never behaved so obediently. Naturally, Luo Fan didn't know that Zhang Jian's behavior today was the first time he had seen it in his life. Even if he knew, he wouldn't pay too much attention to it. After all, for him, for others to be so obedient to him, this was a habit that had been developed for hundreds of millions of years. Therefore, he only listened to Zhang Jian start to talk about the situation of the cultivation world on Earth, and occasionally asked a few questions that Zhang Jian couldn't explain clearly. Through Zhang Jian's narration, Luo Fan gradually had a general understanding of the cultivation world on Earth, and at the same time, he also had his own speculations. The cultivation world on Earth was similar to the legends he had heard before he transmigrated, but also very different. The cultivation world on Earth was not divided into Taoism and Devil, but Buddhism and Taoism. Among them, Buddhism was divided into two sects, Buddhism and Tantra, each of which had dozens of temples, and the number of cultivators was several times more than that of Taoism. As for Taoism, it was divided into three sects, righteous, evil, and devil. The difference was the classification of cultivation methods. Among them, each sect had more than 10 sections. Because they selected people to cultivate, the number of cultivators added up could not compare to that of Buddhism. The cultivation of Buddhism and Taoism were different. Among them, Buddhism was to cultivate a relic, condense a golden body, and finally get rid of the flesh body to achieve transcendence. As for Taoism, whether it was evil or devil, it was all for the sake of cultivating a golden elixir and seeking immortality. The Mount Shu sect was one of the representatives of the Orthodox Taoism, and together with Kunlun, they were known as the two pillars of the Orthodox Taoism. And among the cultivators in the world, the highest achievement was the head of Kunlun sect, a Jindan immortal with the Taoist title of Tianmingzi. It was said that he had 1,000 years of cultivation, but in order to suppress the evil, he did not ascend. Zhang Jian's lips were dry, and only then did he clearly explain the complicated situation of the cultivation world on Earth. As for Luo Fan, he casually summarized, and in the end, only the above paragraph was left. How many Jindan immortals are there around now? Luo Fan asked casually. Senior, please understand. I really don't know about this. After all, Jindan immortals have lived for a long time and are no longer on the same level as us. I only know that Tianmingzi is a Jindan immortal. The other Jindan immortals definitely exist, but I don't know about them, Zhang Jian said. After saying so much, Zhang Jian was already more calm, and his words were also free and easy. He was no longer as nervous as he was at the beginning. Luo Fan nodded, indicating that he understood. Does the Mount Shu sect have records of where to ascend after attaining Jindan? Luo Fan continued to ask. This I really don't know. Zhang Jian shook his head and said. This answer was already within Luo Fan's expectations. After all, Zhang Jian was only at the ethereal opening realm. There were still two great realms before he could reach Jindan, the netherworld steadying realm and the rebirth realm. He was still too far away from Jindan. So how could he know everything about Jindan? Although he had already expected this, Luo Fan was still a little disappointed. All right, I have no more questions. Since you have explained all these to me today, I will allow you to ask me 3 questions. This is a rare opportunity, so don't waste it. Luo Fan smiled, took a sip of wine, and said such a sentence. Luo Fan's words were so simple, but they directly struck Zhang Jian like a bolt of lightning, causing Zhang Jian's mind to go blank in an instant. Even his recently cultivated Yin spirit almost dissipated. To be able to cultivate from a naughty kid to the number 1 of the new generation in 43 years, one could imagine Zhang Jian's wisdom. With such wisdom, How could he not understand how powerful the person in front of him was? And such an existence only needed to give him a little guidance, and it would be enough to change his life. Now that such a huge opportunity was placed in front of him, how could he not be excited? Zhang Jian's mind was blank for a while before he gradually recovered. Junior has been rude. Zhang Jian bowed to Luo Fan to apologize. Luo Fan smiled and said, "It's nothing, you can do as you please." Zhang Jian bowed again, then closed his eyes and activated his mental cultivation method, trying hard to calm his restless mind. Seeing this, Luo Fan nodded to himself. To be able to calm his mind and not be impatient in front of such a huge opportunity, his willpower was quite good. With such a willpower, even without his guidance, he would definitely have a promising future. Zhang Jian calmed his mind and adjusted his breathing for an entire 10 minutes before he was able to recover his state of mind. His mind had completely recovered to its incomparably calm and clear state. 3 questions, no matter what. Luo Fan saw that Zhang Jian's eyes had regained their calmness and smiled. "Thank you, Senior." Junior's first question is, can one attain immortality after cultivating the golden elixir? Zhang Jian looked at Luo Fan and asked. Luo Fan originally thought that Zhang Jian would ask about the specific cultivation method, but he didn't expect Zhang Jian to ask such a fundamental question. He couldn't help but look at Zhang Jian in a different light. Zhang Jian felt a little uncomfortable under Luo Fan's gaze. He carefully said, "Junior has been taught by the elders in the sect since young that those who don't cultivate the golden elixir are ants, and those who cultivate the golden elixir can attain immortality. However, the more I cultivate, the more I doubt it. Although there's a saying in this world that cultivates the golden elixir can attain immortality, there has never been a golden elixir who lived from ancient times until now. Although this question is simple, it has already affected Junior's cultivation. That's why I asked Senior. If Senior feels that this question is too general, Junior can also change it." "No, I don't think it's because your question isn't good, but because your question is too good. It's so good that it touches on the essence of cultivation. There are thousands of cultivators in the world, but those who can ask this question are probably less than 1 in 10,000. Luo Fan sighed. Zhang Jian couldn't help but reveal an uncontrollable smile after being praised by Luo Fan. In the past year, Zhang Jian had traveled the world and received so many praises that even he couldn't count them. Not to mention the simple praise from Luo Fan. He had heard even more direct and exaggerated praises countless times. He had long become numb to words of praise. It was impossible for him to be happy for a few days like when he was just born. However, at this moment, Luo Fan only showed a hint of praise in his words, and it made him feel an unprecedented glory. It was as if receiving a few words of praise from the person in front of him was enough to comfort him for the rest of his life. Even Zhang Jian himself felt that the joy that emerged from the bottom of his heart was somewhat unbelievable and incomprehensible. In fact, Zhang Jian's reaction was extremely normal. Chapter 571. Golden Elixir. Luo Fan did not continue to praise Zhang Jian. After all, although Zhang Jian's question made him look at him in a different light, it was only a little. Naturally, he would not praise him incessantly. Achieving the golden elixir is said to grant longevity, but in reality, it can only extend one's life by 3,000 years. After 3,000 years, if one is unable to break through to the next realm, they will die of deva decay. Luo Fan said plainly. Zhang Jian's expression changed drastically when he heard that. So that's the case. Zhang Jian could not help but spit out these words. However, his expression quickly returned to normal. He bowed at Luo Fan and said, "Junior's second question is whether there is a way to live forever." Yes, Luo Fan had already expected that this would be the second question, so he didn't hesitate to say such a word. Luo Fan had countless ways to live forever, and there were many that could be cultivated on Earth. It would not be a problem to give one to Zhang Jian. However, he would not give the way to live forever without waiting for Zhang Jian to ask. Zhang Jian's eyes lit up. Although he had calmed himself down before asking, he still felt an indescribable excitement at that moment. His body could not help but tremble slightly. Anyone who had the heart to cultivate the way to live forever would not be able to remain indifferent to it. What was more, he had just heard that since ancient times, the way of gold elixir cultivated in the cultivation world of the divine land could not really achieve immortality. This almost completely destroyed his lifelong belief. Suddenly, he heard the man in front of him say so resolutely that he had a way to achieve immortality. How could he not be excited? As for whether Luo Fan would deceive him or not, Zhang Jian didn't need to think about it at all. The gap between him and the person in front of him was so big that he couldn't even imagine it. How could this person need to deceive him with empty words? Zhang Jian pushed his chair away and knelt before Luo Fan. He kowtowed and said, "Disciple Zhang Jian begs Senior to teach me the way to live forever. I'm willing to pay any price for it. Senior, please be merciful." Ha ha ha! Luo Fan could not help but laugh out loud when he heard Zhang Jian's words. After a long while, he finally stopped laughing and shook his head. "You don't have to kneel before me. Just now, I said that you could ask me 3 questions. No matter what the question is, it naturally includes the method of longevity. I can teach you this technique, but I have a condition. No matter what the conditions are, I will do it." Zhang Jian's heart was extremely firm, and he said without hesitation. Luo Fan did not rejoice when he saw Zhang Jian's reaction. Instead, he frowned slightly. Looking at this person's behavior, it was clear that he was willing to kill his wife, son, and parents in exchange for the method of immortality. This made him somewhat displeased. It was naturally a good thing that one's heart was firm in pursuing the Tao. However, it was slightly too much to be firm to the point of suppressing all emotions. However, Zhang Jian did not have much of a relationship with him, so he would not go back on his promise because of this bit of displeasure. As such, he smiled faintly and said, "I don't need you to do anything. Just completely forget about meeting me today, and don't teach this method of longevity to anyone in the future." Zhang Jian was slightly stunned when he heard that. He did not expect this person's condition to be so simple. One had to know that he had already decided to destroy his sect and kill all his friends and family to prove his Tao heart. He had to do it. Hearing Luo Fan's words, he felt suffocated, as if his punch had landed on cotton. However, this dazed expression only appeared for a moment. Things that were easy to do were naturally much better than things that were difficult. As such, he bowed and said, "I hereby swear that I will not reveal what happened today to anyone. I will also not teach Senior's method of longevity to anyone. If I go back on my word, may my soul scatter and I die a horrible death." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a faint rumble of thunder in the air. It was as if the world had accepted his oath. The sound of thunder came so coincidentally that Zhang Jian's expression changed slightly before returning to normal. No matter where this phenomenon came from, it did not matter to Zhang Jian. After all, he did not plan on going back on his word. Hearing Zhang Jian's oath, Luo Fan smiled and nodded. He casually swiped the air. The thin, acquired chi of heaven and earth in the surroundings quickly condensed, forming countless words and images in the space he swiped. These words and images were very small, but extremely clear. They constantly flickered in the air, as if they had been engraved in the depths of space and had existed since ancient times. Since Zhang Jian was chosen by the Shushan sect, his talent naturally did not need to be mentioned. Having a photographic memory was only a kind of instinct for him. Therefore, when Luo Fan condensed these words one by one, he memorized them one by one. By the time Luo Fan condensed the entire cultivation method, Zhang Jian had also completely memorized the entire cultivation method. This cultivation method was very similar to the cultivation method that Zhang Jian cultivated, but there were many differences. It appeared to be more complicated and more mysterious. The final result of this cultivation method was not the golden core, but the primordial spirit. However, this kind of primordial soul was not the primordial soul great Tao that Luo Fan had created in the primordial world. It could only be called a small Tao. The power of the primordial soul that was cultivated in the end was countless times weaker than the primordial soul that was cultivated in the primordial soul Great Tao. At most, it could only allow the person who cultivated the primordial soul to obtain the ability to live forever. Become the yin spirit, cast the yang spirit, and then destroy the body and integrate it into the yang spirit, become the primordial spirit, and escape the cycle of life and death. Zhang Jian muttered to himself while thinking about the cultivation method. The mystery and complexity of the cultivation method was many times stronger than the golden core cultivation method that he had cultivated. According to his talent, it was impossible for him to comprehend how to cultivate it without a few years. If he wanted to finally cultivate it, it would be wishful thinking without thousands of years. However, this could not stop Zhang Jian from understanding the general process of cultivating this cultivation method. After all, Luo Fan's cultivation method didn't have too many false words to cover up. He directly wrote down the process of cultivation. As long as one saw this cultivation method, he would have a considerable understanding of the entire cultivation process of this cultivation method. Of course, understanding was one thing. To really understand and really cultivate it was another thing. Sure enough, I can live forever. Although he couldn't really understand the essence of this cultivation method, just by looking at its description, Zhang Jian could feel a charm that was completely different from any cultivation method he had seen before. This charm made him truly feel that this cultivation method could definitely allow him to obtain true longevity. Thank you for the cultivation method, Senior. If I have any achievements in the future, it will definitely be because of Senior today. Zhang Jian kowtowed in joy. Luo Fan smiled slightly and shook his head. He waved his hand, and the words and images that were condensed from the chi of heaven and earth that seemed to be engraved on the void instantly collapsed, turning back into the chi of heaven and earth and dissipating. After that, he said, I do not need your gratitude. Today, I asked you a question, and you asked me a question. It is equivalent to a transaction. There is nothing here. You can go on your own. Since Luo Fan had already spoken, even if Zhang Jian did not want to leave, he had no choice but to kowtow and leave. After Zhang Jian left, Luo Fan ate and drank for a while. He casually stretched out his hand, and a piece of gold appeared out of thin air in his hand. It was about 5 taels of gold, and he placed it on the table. After that, he twisted his body and used ground shrink to leave. That piece of gold was casually grabbed and condensed by Luo Fan from the ground. For the secular world, it was enough for an ordinary person to live without worries for more than 10 years. It was more than enough to serve as the food and wine for this meal. It could even be considered a great opportunity for the owner of the restaurant. The place where Luo Fan reappeared was on a barren mountain. For Luo Fan, no matter how rich the chi of heaven and earth was, it was not very useful to him. Therefore, even if he wanted to choose a place to cultivate, he did not need to choose the kind of place that ordinary cultivators would choose. He only needed a quiet place. However, it was obvious that this time, Luo Fan did not choose this barren mountain for cultivation. Once one cultivates the golden elixir, they will ascend. There must be some secret hidden in this. Perhaps if the secret is revealed, the truth behind the earth will also be revealed. Perhaps this will also be of considerable benefit to the search for the mysterious person. Luo Fan thought like this, and with a move of his mind, he began to deduce. The whole earth was not very big for Luo Fan. It was the same even if it was just an incarnation condensed by a little thought on earth at this time. Therefore, with just a thought from Luo Fan, he could instantly bring the entire earth into his senses. The earth during the Northern Song dynasty was naturally very different from the modern earth. The most significant difference was the number of cultivators and the amount of chi of heaven and earth in the void. Compared to the untainted world, the earth during the Northern Song dynasty was naturally like a stinking ditch. If any creatures from the untainted world came, they would not want to stay even a second longer. However, compared to the modern earth, the earth during the Northern Song dynasty was like a fairyland. At least, there was still a considerable amount of chi of heaven and earth in the Northern Song dynasty. However, There was not even a trace of chi of heaven and earth in the modern earth. The whole earth was like a desert of chi. Under such circumstances, there were many cultivators of Buddhism and Taoism on the earth during the Northern Song dynasty, as well as the existence of swordsmen and immortals. However, there were only legendary superhumans and some martial artists who practiced national martial arts on the earth after the Northern Song dynasty. Now, Luo Fan carefully sensed the whole earth. Combined with the news he had heard from Zhang Jian before, he instantly knew countless facts that Zhang Jian could not know. Of course, the Son of Destiny was not the only Jindan on the earth. In fact, there were as many as 13 Jindan masters hidden on the earth. In addition to the Son of Destiny, there were also 10 Jindan masters, or Buddhist monks, who had cultivated Saraira on the Divine Land. The remaining 2 were similar to the Jindan masters, but they were outside. One was in Europe, and the other was in South America. However, these 2 Jindan masters outside the Divine Land seemed to have cultivated in a muddle-headed way. Their control of their own power was poor. Not to mention that they were not comparable to the Jindan masters in the Divine Land. They were far inferior to the existence of the phantom opening realm in Zhang Jian's mind. Unfortunately, these Jindan masters seem to have used secret techniques to cut off the path of ascension, but they are not suitable for use. Forget it. Since the existing one doesn't work, I'll make one. Luo Fan thought to himself. Thinking about it, his thoughts moved slightly. He reached in the void and grabbed a child beggar in a small city thousands of miles away. He pulled the child beggar in front of him. The child beggar was about 3 or 4 years old. His face was yellow and muscular, and his body emitted a foul smell. However, his eyes were quite clear, and there was still a bit of innocence left in them. The child beggar was begging on the street when he suddenly found that the world around him had changed. He could not help but be shocked. However, since the child beggar could still maintain a bit of clarity in his eyes at this time, he was naturally not an ordinary child beggar. Seeing a young man standing in front of him with a faint smile, he knew that it must be this person who made the place he was in change. Now was the Northern Song dynasty, not the modern era. The legends of immortals and gods still had a considerable market at this time. Most people would first think of legends of immortals and gods when they encountered something unbelievable, not aliens. Therefore, the child beggar directly knelt in front of Luo Fan and kowtowed. Greetings, great deity. I need someone to cultivate to the Golden Core realm and ascend to the legendary Heaven realm. Your potential is not bad. Are you willing to cultivate? Luo Fan did not say anything else and directly asked. These words were too profound for a child beggar to understand. However, the child beggar was blessed. Although he did not know what Luo Fan was talking about, he understood the words ascension and cultivation. Therefore, he directly kowtowed until his head bled, and he said that he was willing. Luo Fan did not care if the child beggar really understood. Anyway, as long as the child beggar was willing to cultivate, it was enough for Luo Fan. In the future, as long as the child beggar could cultivate to the Golden Core realm, Luo Fan would naturally know how he could ascend and where he could ascend to. It did not matter if the child beggar was willing or not. Seeing that the child beggar had agreed, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He pointed at the child beggar, and a bit of spiritual light rushed out of his hand. In an instant, it crossed the void and directly rushed into the mud ball between the child beggar's eyebrows. It merged with the child beggar's memory, so that the child beggar suddenly learned a lot of knowledge that he did not know a moment ago. This is cultivation. Countless words and pictures poured out of the child beggar's eyes. Obviously, he was absorbing the knowledge and the memory at an extremely fast speed. The knowledge that Luo Fan inserted into the child beggar's memory was all-inclusive, including the language used in the Northern Song dynasty, the knowledge of the meridians of the human body, all kinds of common sense of cultivation, and most importantly, a golden core cultivation method that was completely created according to the child beggar's physique. Luo Fan's current knowledge was so vast that it had almost reached the peak of all living beings in the world. His understanding of cultivation was so deep that it surpassed all living beings on Earth and in the primordial world. Just now, with just a glance at Zhang Jian's body, he had already completely understood the essence of the Jindan stage cultivation method. Under such circumstances, It was extremely easy for him to casually create a golden core cultivation method that was completely suitable for a person. At this time, the cultivation method that Luo Fan taught the child beggar was randomly created according to the child beggar's physique. However, even if it was a cultivation method that he had casually created, it was still countless times stronger than the cultivation methods of any sect on earth. Even if such a cultivation method was only aimed at the child beggar's physique, if the chosen one of the golden core immortals on earth saw it, he would probably want to exchange all his belongings for it. Because this cultivation method basically pointed the end of the golden core cultivation method from the most basic path. Compared to this cultivation method, the so-called cultivation methods of each sect that they had cultivated in the past were like narrow paths with many twists and turns. It was simply unbearable. At this time, the child beggar naturally did not know that the cultivation method he had obtained was so precious. He was simply happy that he had gained so much knowledge. Luo Fan did not bother to listen to the child beggar's words of gratitude. With a wave of his hand, the acquired chi of heaven and earth in the void quickly gathered. In the process, it was constantly purified and condensed. Gradually, a wisp of primordial chi was born. After the wisp of primordial chi was born, there was a faint sound of thunder in the void, but there was no real thunder. As I expected, if one does not truly reach the Khanate realm, the heaven and earth will not truly reject him, Luo Fan thought. He waved his hand, and the wisp of primordial chi elongated in the void. In the blink of an eye, it formed a 30-foot spherical formation that surrounded the child beggar. This spherical formation was extremely complicated. There were an entire 30 million or more talismans that formed this formation, and they were densely arranged together like a cocoon. They covered the entire interior of the formation to the point it didn't reveal the slightest light or shadow. As the formation was formed, the acquired chi of heaven and earth within a 3,000-mile radius gathered and quickly entered the formation. As more and more chi of heaven and earth entered, the changes produced by the formation became greater and greater. In the end, the entire formation emitted a light that soared to the heavens and the earth. The space within the formation continued to expand and change. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into a space with a circumference of 100 miles. Once the space was formed, the true function of the formation could be seen. The space around the formation twisted slightly. The flow of time within the formation sped up in an unimaginable manner. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, 10 times, 100 times. After an unknown amount of time, the flow of time within the formation had sped up to 3,000 times that of the outside world. With the flow of time 3,000 times, 1 day in the outside world was equivalent to 10 years in the formation. With this speed, with the child beggar's talent, and the mysteriousness of the cultivation method, the child beggar would only need 3 days to cultivate to the gold core realm. Then, he would be able to draw out the guiding force and ascend to the heaven realm. 3 days, I can wait. The thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. With that thought, he waved his hand. The shocking phenomenon caused by the rapid gathering of the acquired chi of heaven and earth suddenly disappeared. Chapter 572. Ascension and Surprise with Luo Fan's ability. Even if all the cultivators on earth were to use their powers, they would not be able to discover the abnormality of this place. This was indeed the case. Although there had been a strange phenomenon just now. After Luo Fan had completely covered it up, no cultivators had come here to check. It was as though there had never been any strange phenomenon here. Luo Fan had expected this, but he was not surprised. He sat on the top of the mountain and closed his eyes slightly, quietly waiting for the child beggar to reach the gold core stage when the time flow was 3,000 times faster than on Earth. Luo Fan's sensing ability had long been powerful to a limit. Sitting on the barren mountain, he did not need to do anything else and could quietly sense that the entire Earth was constantly rotating with the passage of time. The feeling of the entire world trembling slightly was completely different from the feeling in the primordial world, the medium world, and the minor chiliocosm. This gave Luo Fan a different kind of understanding. Although he could not comprehend any incredible magic from it, he could truly feel that the supreme power that filled the entire universe was at work at all times. He could clearly sense that the space-time where the Earth was located was a complete and inseparable whole. When he felt that the Earth had rotated 3 times and finally returned to its original position, the formation he had set suddenly shook slightly. After that, a powerful force suddenly erupted from within the formation, and it instantly tore the formation into pieces. This formation was a space-time formation. The time and space inside were different from the time and space outside. With such a sudden explosion, the time and space inside and outside clashed with each other, erupting with an earth-shattering explosion. Fortunately, Luo Fan had long sensed this. With a thought, an extremely powerful force appeared out of thin air, directly locking the void within a radius of 100 miles. The explosion caused by the collision of space-time was almost impossible for other cultivators to resist, but to the powerful force that Luo Fan had summoned, it was so weak. It was easily suppressed, and space-time was also completely fixed. The explosion naturally disappeared. As time and space froze, a man in a long robe seemed to have traversed through time and space and suddenly appeared at the center of the explosion, where the formation was originally located. The man's appearance was ordinary, but there was a faint golden light radiating from his face. This golden light was extremely profound and extremely condensed. At first glance, it didn't seem to exist, but upon closer inspection, it seemed to be some kind of substance. This person floated in void space with an extremely joyful expression on his face. Waves of invisible power gushed out from the pores on his body, expelling the power that filled the entire universe and guided the entire Earth to constantly circulate. His entire body seemed to be weightless. 3 days meant that more than 30 years had passed in the space-time formation. For such a long period of time, he was completely isolated from all the distractions, and there was no worry of yuan qi deficiency. His aptitude was also passable. Even if he only cultivated an ordinary cultivation method, it would be enough for him to cultivate to the gold core realm. Moreover, this person cultivated the supreme cultivation method that Luo Fan had specially created for this person. There were no detours, and it was the supreme cultivation method that led straight to the gold core realm. This person carefully enjoyed the transcendent joy. After a long time, he finally noticed Luo Fan, who was standing quietly at the side. Shocked, he retracted his body and knelt on the ground, saying, "Thank you, great celestial, for fulfilling my wish. I've already said that I only let you cultivate this method so that you can ascend," Luo Fan said calmly. As he spoke, he casually waved his hand, and an irresistible force acted on this person, making him unable to kneel. No matter what, it's also great celestial's kindness that Gooden was able to cultivate the ability to live forever from a beggar. Although Gooden's parents died when he was young, I know how to repay kindness. I don't dare to forget it for even a moment. Although the person was unable to kneel, he still said extremely respectfully. Luo Fan shook his head and did not answer. Instead, he asked, "Now that you've cultivated to the gold core realm, do you have any special feelings?" The person knew that this was the purpose of Luo Fan's letting him cultivate, so he did not dare to neglect and directly described all his feelings without hesitation. "Oh, so you faintly feel that there's some kind of force that is guiding you, making you have the desire to fly up?" Luo Fan carefully analyzed and concluded. "That's right," the person hurriedly said. After cultivating in the space-time array for 30 years, this person naturally did not just cultivate diligently. In fact, to cultivate to the gold core realm was not something that could be achieved by cultivating diligently. In addition to cultivating diligently, one also needed to see all kinds of life, the surging mortal world, and temper one's heart until it was perfect and flawless. Finally, one could temper the yin spirit into the yang spirit, and then combine the yang spirit with the life essence of the whole body to condense into a gold core. It might be difficult for others to accomplish all of this within a formation, but for Luo Fan, it was just a matter of a thought. Therefore, although this person cultivated to the gold core realm in the array, his mentality and willpower were not much different from ordinary perfected masters of the gold core realm, and he would not appear to be less intelligent because of this. Therefore, he could distinguish the various feelings after cultivating to the gold core realm, and he could also analyze which were added by the outside world and which were born from himself. Up. Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly, and he carefully sensed all the power that the person in front of him had received. The kind of grand power that was everywhere and filled the entire universe was naturally not to mention him. In addition to this kind of power, the pressure of the outside world, the pressure of the atmosphere, the reaction force of the ground, all of these were sensed by Luo Fan without missing a single thing. With Luo Fan's wisdom, the so-called supercomputer of the later generations could not compare to him. In an instant, the source of all the power was instantly reconstructed in Luo Fan's mind. After eliminating the rest, he finally discovered where the invisible force came from. It actually came from the sun. Luo Fan's eyes lit up. He felt that all the fog had completely disappeared, and the veil of the place of ascension was finally lifted at this moment. According to various theories of the future generations, the ultimate source of all the power on Earth, be it coal, oil, or the legendary nuclear energy, ultimately came from the core star of the solar system, the sun. That theory seemed to have some flaws in the current Luo Fan, but there was not too much of a mistake in the root. Therefore, if there was a place that could support the cultivation of all the perfected masters of the gold core realm on Earth since ancient times, the greatest possibility could only exist on the sun. That was not difficult to think of, but after all, Luo Fan was an ordinary person who had transmigrated from Earth to the primordial world. After more than 20 years of education, his concept of the sun had long been set. In his eyes, this huge star was a huge fireball. The temperature on it was so high that it was enough to destroy all living beings. He naturally would not take the initiative to think that there was a world above the sun where perfected masters of the gold core realm lived. At this moment, through the analysis of the traction force on the person in front of him, after isolating all the impossible situations, there was finally no obstacle in Luo Fan's eyes that it was not difficult to deduce this fact. Since he already understood where the perfected master of the gold core realm would eventually ascend to, Luo Fan naturally would not hesitate anymore. With a thought, he said to the person, "I already understand everything. I don't need you to do anything anymore. It's up to you whether you want to ascend or stay in the mortal world. Godin has no worries in the world. I'm willing to ascend, as I said," the person said without hesitation. Luo Fan nodded and did not persuade him anymore. Seeing this, the person immediately stood still and activated the gold core. The golden light around his body surged, and in an instant, the wind and clouds moved. Endless postnatal chi of heaven and earth quickly gathered from all directions. The postnatal chi of heaven and earth was originally invisible and intangible, so it naturally could not show any color. But at this moment, after the postnatal chi of heaven and earth gathered, it was illuminated by the strong golden light that erupted from the person's body and gradually underwent some kind of incomparably mysterious change. The golden light that the person's body emitted was the natural core chi of the gold core. This core chi was extremely mysterious. It looked like it was glowing, but in reality, it did not have any color. Instead, it was an aura formed from extremely pure will that fused with the laws of heaven and earth that existed in the unseen world. This aura possessed all kinds of unimaginable power. If a normal person could be enveloped by this core chi, their physique would naturally be greatly improved. In the future, when they stepped onto the path of cultivation, their cultivation speed would definitely be much faster than when they were not enveloped by the core chi. And if a seriously ill person was enveloped by this core chi, although the illness could not be cured immediately, it would still be greatly improved. If it was just an ordinary illness, then it could even be directly cured. This core chi was just that mysterious. And when such a mysterious core chi shone on the endless postnatal chi of heaven and earth that had gathered, it naturally caused the chi to undergo all kinds of unimaginable changes. For a time, rays of light soared into the sky, and the postnatal chi of heaven and earth even showed signs of soaring dragons and leaping tigers that could cover half the sky. Although this was a barren mountain, such a huge phenomenon finally attracted the attention of others. There was a cultivation world on Earth, and golden core cultivation was the mainstream. It was naturally impossible for there to be no legends about the phenomenon that would appear after cultivating to golden core. The signs of soaring dragons and leaping tigers that spanned thousands of feet, the soaring rays of light that could only appear after cultivating to golden core, and the phenomenon of condensing postnatal chi of heaven and earth that stirred the sky, all told others that a cultivator had cultivated to golden core, escaped the cycle of life and death, and obtained eternal life. However, this was a bare mountain after all. Even though many cultivators sensed such a huge change, only a few golden core perfected masters could arrive in time. And being able to arrive in time and arriving in time were naturally two completely different concepts. Thus, this phenomenon lasted for half a cup of tea's time. Only a ray of light shot over at a speed that surpassed the speed of sound. In the end, it landed tens of thousands of feet away from Luo Fan and Gooden, turning into a Taoist with a long white beard. With a thought, Luo Fan saw the person's appearance clearly. Combining it with the situation of all the cultivators on Earth, he knew that the person before him was a golden core from the nearby Chuanjian sect. As for his name, he did not care. If it was before, Luo Fan might have been interested in talking to this person. But now that he knew that the destination of a Taoist master Jinan stage was the sun, he was naturally not interested in wasting too much time with this ant-like existence in his eyes. Thus, he did not care and pretended that this person had never appeared. At that moment, Gooden was activating his golden core with all his might, wanting to ascend along with the guiding force that was acting on his body. Naturally, he could not waste his energy on this new golden core. For a moment, the golden core of the Chuanjian sect, who would be strongly welcomed no matter where he went, was treated coldly like never before. That person stood on another mountain, his eyes filled with shock. The bigger the phenomenon of a golden core was, the stronger the golden core was, and the more perfected the golden core was. The size of this person's golden core phenomenon had far exceeded the imagination of the golden core before him. In fact, he even suspected if this person had truly attained golden core and not something even higher. This phenomenon is more than 10 times larger than the one I had back then. Can the phenomenon of reaching the gold core really be this large? This was the only thought that reverberated in the person's mind. His eyes were filled with unimaginable shock. Right then, Gooden's golden core phenomenon changed again. The image of a soaring dragon and leaping tiger shuddered, and a thunderbolt was born out of thin air between the dragon and tiger. It was like the first thunderbolt at the beginning of the world, splitting the dragon and tiger phenomenon apart instantly. After the thunderbolt, a pillar of light was born out of thin air from the source of the thunderbolt, enveloping Gooden, who was below. At the same time, Gooden felt the guiding force that existed in the unseen world suddenly increase by more than 1,000,000 times. The force was so strong that his body could not help but float upwards, charging towards the source of the pillar of light. In that instant, countless images flashed through Gooden's mind. Among these lights and shadows were the smiling faces he saw at the moment of his birth, the hypocrisy and coldness of the world he saw when his parents died, the various states of the world he saw when he begged for food, and the various experiences he had after meeting Luo Fan. All of the things he had experienced in his life were replayed in his mind at this moment. Suddenly, Gooden understood that he was bidding farewell to his past. After stepping into the pillar of light, he would no longer be an ordinary child beggar, but a golden core that had transcended the mortal world. Understanding that, Gooden's face was instantly filled with tears. An indescribable joy rose from his heart. To Godan, the life of a mortal was hell. To him, being able to leave the mortal world was a dream come true. Thus, even though countless memories flashed through his mind, he did not hesitate at all. He charged towards the pillar of light with incomparable determination. At that moment, Luo Fan was not paying attention to how determined Gooden was. Instead, he was paying attention to the location of the pillar of light. At the spot where the beam of light was emitted, the void did not crack. Instead, there was an extremely complicated and tiny formation. The formation was not a three-dimensional talisman. Instead, it was a talisman that Luo Fan had never seen before, but it contained endless mysteries. At first glance, the talisman looked like hieroglyphs. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that the talisman was millions of times more complicated than the so-called hieroglyphs. If one were to forcefully use hieroglyphs to describe the talisman, perhaps each talisman could be expanded into tens of thousands of words. If one were to use the words used in the future, even if it was in classical Chinese, one would need thousands of words to describe the talisman. It actually contains such mysteries. It seems like I have underestimated the cultivation on Earth. Luo Fan looked at the talisman and suddenly had a thought. Although these runes were so complicated and abstruse, Luo Fan's cultivation realm had already reached the peak of Tai Gold. Although it was just a thought here, his wisdom was also a few % of the original bodies. He naturally had the ability to see through all phenomena and see the essence of everything. Therefore, with just a glance, he could see the talisman clearly and completely see through the mysteries contained in the talisman. He could even deduce many talisman that were not contained in the formation. There were 5,000 runes in this formation. Among them, there was an extremely mysterious and close connection between every two talisman. The 5,000 talisman was condensed into a whole in a mysterious way. If any of the 5,000 talisman was missing, the formation would completely collapse. It could even erupt with an unparalleled destructive power that could completely turn the area within a radius of 3,000 miles into dust. Amazing! Looking at the complicated combination of the talisman, even Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim, "Amazing!" At that moment, the formation turned and sucked Gooden into it. With another tremble, it suddenly opened up a formless passageway that led to an unfathomable place. The passageway was extremely obscure. If Luo Fan hadn't seen through the mysteries of the talisman, he might not have discovered the existence of the passageway, not to mention the cultivators on Earth. From their point of view, the process of ascension might just be the appearance of the guiding light pillar. The Golden Core Master would be involuntarily guided by the guiding light pillar. After entering the light pillar, he would keep moving upwards until he reached the place where the light pillar was produced. Then, he would naturally disappear without a trace. After the formless passageway appeared, the formation shook and sent Gooden, who had transformed into a formless and mysterious existence through the formation, towards an unfathomable place through the passageway. With a thought, Luo Fan didn't follow the passageway. Instead, he extended his senses along the passageway. In the blink of an eye, he reached the end of the passageway ahead of Gooden and discovered an incomparably vast world. Just as Luo Fan sensed the incomparably vast world, the formation sent Gooden to that world. The formation had already sent Gooden to that world. At that moment, the formless passageway suddenly closed and disappeared just like how it had appeared. Before the passageway disappeared, Luo Fan sensed that after Gooden entered the vast world, he reformed his figure under the effect of some laws of the world. He returned to the state he was in before he stepped into the formation. Moreover, his expression didn't change at all. It was as if the entire process hadn't happened, and he was still in the state he was in before he ascended. Seeing this, Luo Fan gained a deeper understanding of the formation's mysteries. Chapter 573. Above the sun's core, the Jindan perfected master of the Chuanjin sect was dumbfounded by the sight of Gooden's ascension. Although there were legends of ascension on Earth, there were legends after all. Even Jindan perfected masters rarely saw normal ascension. But at this moment, there was a Jindan perfected master who so easily ascended to the heavenly state, transcending the mortal world. The impact on his mind could be imagined. Luo Fan naturally did not care about what others thought. Since he already knew where the heavenly state was, he would not hesitate. With a thought, his body turned into a rainbow and charged straight into the sky. This method of traveling was not as traceless as tearing through the void and teleporting. Even in terms of speed, it was inferior. But the shock this method brought to others was not something that tearing through the void and teleporting could bring. Just like at this moment, when the Jindan perfected master of the Chuanjin sect saw Luo Fan turn into a rainbow and charge into the sky, crossing tens of thousands of miles in an instant and rushing out of the atmosphere, the shock on his face immediately became sluggish. The agitation brought about by Gooden's ascension was completely replaced by the scene before his eyes. How is this possible? How can there be such a remarkable ability to turn into a rainbow and fly through the void in this world? Ever since ancient Jindan disappeared from the mortal world and the world changed, the chi of heaven and earth in the mortal world should not be able to support such a remarkable ability. How can this person know such a remarkable ability? The Jindan perfected master's mind was in a mess. He simply could not believe what he saw. If not for the fact that he was a Jindan perfected master and had an extremely high level of control over his own body, he would most likely suspect that his eyes were playing tricks on him. After a long time, when the streak of light left behind by Luo Fan's body finally dissipated completely and the surroundings gradually returned to normal, the Jindan perfected master gradually came back to his senses. With a rather complicated gaze, he looked at the barren mountain that had shocked him twice in succession and sighed. It seems that there are still many hidden secrets in this world. I don't know if it was right or wrong for me to cut off the path to heaven and choose to live in the mortal world. After a long while, he turned around. An array of sword light separated from his body. It wrapped around his body and took him back to where he had come from at a speed several times faster than the speed of sound. After reaching the Gold Core realm, one would be able to travel through the void without the help of any magic tools or treasures. However, it would consume the Gold Core true essence that they had painstakingly cultivated, and the speed was not as fast as using magic tools or treasures. Therefore, they would usually use magic tools or treasures to travel. At this time, Luo Fan had already left the atmosphere. The reason why he had transformed into a rainbow and not teleported away by tearing space apart was that his current destination was not Earth, but the distant sun. At this moment, his incarnation on Earth was condensed from a thought. He was only an individual immortal. Although he could sense the entire Earth at will, he was still not strong enough to sense the distant sun. After all, according to the theories of the future generations, even the fastest ray of light in the universe would take 8 minutes to reach the Earth from the sun. One could only imagine how great the distance was. It was obvious that the speed of Luo Fan, who had transformed into a rainbow, was not as fast as the speed of light. However, it was clearly much faster than the speed of light. After more than 10 minutes, he had already crossed the distance between Earth and the sun and arrived at the scorching fireball. The sun was millions of times larger than Earth. The temperature was so high that it had reached an unimaginable level. Even though he was hovering in the void, tens of thousands of miles away from the sun, Luo Fan still felt an indescribable heat rising from his heart. Even the clothes covering his body were almost set ablaze. Fortunately, Luo Fan was not a mortal after all. Since he dared to come to the sun personally, he had already made all preparations. With a thought, the scorching heat of the sun around him changed slightly. It was distorted by his supreme magic power and turned into a gentle power. It formed a faintly discernible light shield that protected his body and separated him from the outside world. After being enveloped by the light barrier, Luo Fan only felt a sense of coolness. Only then did he have the mood to observe the huge fireball in front of him. The universe that Earth was in was clearly different from the primordial world. The sun of the primordial world was huge, but it was completely condensed from the essence of the true sun fire and the sun. It was a mysterious existence formed by Panga's left eye. It contained endless mysteries of the great Tao, endless living beings, and endless vitality. In the universe where Earth was located, the fixed star was a huge fireball. This sun was also the most ordinary fixed star in the universe. There was no true sun fire or the essence of a sun on it. There was only endless light and heat. Perhaps this light and heat also contained endless power, but it was completely different from the sun of the primordial world. Luo Fan floated outside the sun and looked at the huge star in front of him quietly. His heart was filled with indescribable shock. The great Tao was everywhere. Although the fireball in front of him was not formed by Pangus, like the sun of the primordial world, it also contained the mysteries of the great Tao. At this moment, at such a close distance, the wisps of flames that could burn space and distort time all shocked Luo Fan, allowing Luo Fan to clearly sense the infinite traces of the great Tao contained in this universe. After a long time, Luo Fan sighed. His body shook, and he quickly shot toward the surface of the sun. The light barrier around his body was formed by the heat emitted by the sun. It could absorb the heat from the outside world and turn it into the power of the light barrier. Therefore, although the closer he was to the sun, the higher the temperature, Luo Fan did not feel much change in the temperature around his body. The light barrier did not collapse because of the increase in the heat from the outside world. On the contrary, it continued to thicken because of the increase in the heat. When Luo Fan dodged several solar prominences that stretched across the void like a long river and arrived at the sun's main body, the light barrier was already like a physical existence. It emitted a hazy green light and wrapped Luo Fan like an egg of light. The main body of the sun was divided into several layers. What he had just passed through was equivalent to the atmosphere of the sun, which was the so-called corona. This layer of atmosphere seemed very thin on Earth, but in fact it was extremely thick. Luo Fan flew and shuttled for a few minutes before he passed through this layer of atmosphere. The temperature of this atmosphere was very high. Although it was the lowest among the several layers of the sun, it was still more than 1,000,000 degrees Celsius. It was easy to melt gold and iron. It was impossible for the cultivators on Earth, even perfected golden cores, to survive under such a temperature. Even with the help of various Dharma artifacts and treasures, it was impossible for them to survive there for a long time. However, this was naturally not a problem for Luo Fan. After all, although Luo Fan was only an incarnation of an itinerant immortal, his main body was a supreme existence in the primordial unity gold realm. He could even freely enter and exit the sun of the primordial world. His understanding of the power of the sun was so deep that it had reached an unbelievable level. The essence of the sun in the universe on Earth was different from the essence of the sun in the primordial world. However, the sun was the sun. The endless light and heat were still the same, so the way to deal with it was naturally similar. Therefore, although the temperature of the sun was so high, Luo Fan was still extremely relaxed. He could even use the power of the sun to continuously refine his body, increasing the strength of his incarnation and the power of his body. After the corona was the chromosphere, the photosphere, and the troposphere. Further in was the radiation layer of the sun's main body. Further in was the center of the sun, the source of the endless heat, the sun's core. According to Luo Fan's senses from a mysterious passage formed when Gooden ascended, the golden core perfected golden core's heaven realm was attached to the surface of the sun's core. It was at the border between the radiation layer and the sun's core. As for how the ancient cultivators had opened up such a heavenly realm on the core of the sun, how they had maintained the heavenly realm for eternity, and how they had created the welcoming mechanism to bring the golden core Taoist master here. Even Luo Fan couldn't find the reason before he saw the heavenly realm. This was also the purpose of Luo Fan's visit, to be able to create a heaven realm on the sun's core. Even Luo Fan's main body could only barely achieve this kind of magical power and power. If he was able to comprehend its profundities, then it would be an extremely valuable reference for Luo Fan, who was far away in the primordial world. Even though it couldn't allow him to directly attain the golden immortal Tao fruit, it was still able to allow his cultivation to improve greatly. The sun's core was extremely small, only a quarter of the entire sun's volume. The temperature on it was more than 15 million degrees Celsius, more than 10 times higher than the sun's corona outside, which was millions of degrees Celsius. Such a temperature was also a huge pressure for Luo Fan. At the very least, when crossing the layer of radiation, Luo Fan had no choice but to release the Fa Li possessed by his body and fuse it with a light barrier outside, helping the light barrier resist the infinite heat from the outside world. After all, although the light barrier was a defense formed by converting the heat outside, the conversion efficiency was limited. Without the support of Luo Fan's magic power, when the heat outside increased faster than the conversion speed, the light barrier would collapse. It would also be the moment when Luo Fan's incarnation turned into dust. At that time, perhaps Luo Fan's consciousness could survive due to its extremely high realm, but it would definitely be greatly damaged. According to what I sensed earlier, the heaven realm should be nearby. Luo Fan floated in the radiation layer and looked at the sun's core below with flickering golden and silver light, searching for something different. Although the sun's core was only a quarter of the sun's volume, it was still tens of thousands of times bigger than Earth. With Luo Fan's current strength, if he could sense it at will, it wouldn't take long for him to completely sense the entire sun's core and find out the difference. However, this was the sun's interior after all. The temperature was so high that it could even cause matter to undergo nuclear transformation. Luo Fan naturally couldn't sense at will. Since he couldn't move at will, Luo Fan couldn't be bothered to sense under the enormous pressure. Instead, he used the golden and silver eyes that he brought with his consciousness. Although Luo Fan's main body had already cultivated the solar moon true eyes, this incarnation was only an itinerant immortal after all, and he hadn't spent any time cultivating it. It was already rare for him to have the great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes to observe and search. Luo Fan's figure slowly flew on the surface of the sun's core. The boundless heat and flames around him brought him an incomparably strong pressure. At the same time, it also made his body undergo a rare tempering. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. Compared to such a vast sun's core, a month was only enough for Luo Fan to see 1/10,000th of the entire surface of the sun's core. After a month of tempering, Luo Fan's figure and appearance were still the same as before, but the aura he emitted was much more powerful than before. The gold and silver light in his eyes was also much more powerful than before. After a month of tempering, his physical body had become much stronger than before. Even his golden and silver pupils had become more powerful because of the tempering of the heat of the sun. After all, the golden and silver eyes were mysterious techniques that he had comprehended from the sun and moon of the primordial world. Although the sun in Earth's universe was different from the sun in the primordial world in essence, it was still the sun after all. It had its own similarities with the sun in the primordial world, so it could naturally be used to temper his eyes. On this day, Luo Fan arrived at a place that seemed no different from the other places. His eyes suddenly lit up. The temperature here is a few degrees lower than other places. If the heavenly realm exists, it might be here. With such a thought flashing through his mind, Luo Fan's figure suddenly descended toward the place with the lowest temperature. Although the temperature was the lowest, it was only relative to other places on the surface of the sun's core. In reality, the temperature was still more than 10 million degrees Celsius. Luo Fan naturally did not search for the abnormality on the sun's core casually. In fact, he had already deduced the approximate location of the heavenly realm through his senses. Therefore, there was no need for him to search every area of the sun's core. He only needed to limit himself to a fixed and relatively small area. Although this area was equivalent to 1/100th of the entire sun's core, compared to the entire sun's core, it was already 100 times smaller. Luo Fan was extremely lucky to be able to find a place that was different from 1/10,000th of the sun's core. After descending, Luo Fan carefully looked around, trying his best to find even the slightest difference on the sun's core. The sun's core seemed like a core, but in reality, there were countless intense reactions happening inside it at all times. Its surface was constantly fluctuating and changing. After all, There were countless hydrogen bombs detonating inside the sun's core at all times. Luo Fan had looked at the sun's core for a month, so he naturally knew the characteristics of the sun's core. He also roughly deduced the changes on the surface of the sun's core. Now that he carefully examined it, he discovered that the changes on the surface of the sun's core were indeed a little different from other places. This difference made the changes on the surface of the sun's core seem to have some kind of man-made trace. It seemed to be more regular and gentle. It should be here. Seeing these changes, Luo Fan was even more certain that the heaven boundary was here. In an instant, he used the great sun golden eyes and bright moon silver eyes to their limits. His eyes were like two searchlights, giving off invisible gold and silver light that pierced through the green light barrier and covered the sun's core below. So it's here. As he used his eyesight to its limits, after looking for a while, he finally saw some traces of the heaven boundary. He couldn't help but be overjoyed. A month was naturally only a very short period of time for Luo Fan, but for a whole month, he had to endure the endless heat around him, watching and flying on the surface of the sun's core, which was really boring. It was really tiresome. Now that he finally found traces of his target, how could Luo Fan not be happy? With a thought, Luo Fan casually slapped down. The endless heat emitted by the sun's core quickly gathered, rapidly changing its shape. In an instant, it completely twisted, pulling out countless thin threads and forming countless tiny runes in the air. These runes were the runes that Luo Fan had comprehended from the receiving formation that Godan had used to ascend. After these runes appeared, they quickly combined, finally forming an extremely simple yet extremely complicated whole that contained all sorts of inconceivable mysteries. Like an ice ball, it quickly shot down. In the blink of an eye, it traversed dozens of miles and crashed into the surface of the sun's core. Just as the rune formation was about to touch the surface of the sun's core, countless runes suddenly flashed on the surface of the sun's core. Like electricity flowing through a circuit, they instantly formed a huge formation that covered an area of 1,000 miles. The formation formed the shape of a disk, tightly adhering to the surface of the sun's core. There were more than 500 billion runes on it, and each rune had some sort of subtle and profound connection with any other rune. The 500 billion runes formed an incomparably compact, complete, and inseparable whole. It was deeply engraved into the sun's core, and it continuously extracted the heat from the sun's core and channeled it into the formation. The rune formation that Luo Fan had sent out was formed from 3,000 runes. It did not possess any profound power and was only used to trigger a reaction from the rune formation. The moment it crashed into the formation formed from 500 billion runes, it collapsed with a loud bang. It was directly turned into nothingness by a ripple from the huge formation, disappearing without a trace. After that, the gigantic formation disappeared and could no longer be seen. When Luo Fan saw this, his face could not help but show a shocked expression. Chapter 574. Change in formation. These runes were completely unfamiliar to Luo Fan. After all, although he had the guidance of the 5,000 runes when Gooden ascended, it was impossible for Luo Fan to completely understand the functions of the 500 billion runes so easily. Moreover, the 500 billion runes only flashed by. After the rune formation that Luo Fan had cast collapsed, they disappeared again and could no longer be seen. In such a short period of time, it was impossible for Luo Fan to remember these runes clearly, let alone understand the functions of these runes. In the absence of figuring out its function, there was only one way for Luo Fan to enter this heavenly realm. That was to borrow the ascension formation that appeared out of thin air when Gooden ascended. Just as Luo Fan was about to set up the formation, he suddenly realized that the formation that was formed by the 500 billion runes suddenly trembled and suddenly reappeared from thin air. And after it reappeared, the 500 billion runes continuously emitted some kind of mysterious brilliance. It continued to spread, and in an instant, it swept through the entire formation like an extremely fast sea wave. After the brilliance swept through the entire formation, it rushed upwards, and instantly condensed into a 10,000 feet tall golden-armored deity in the void above. The golden-armored deity was completely constructed by runes, and the densely packed runes were constantly moving in and out of the golden-armored deity's body like ants. From afar, it looked like a body of flesh and blood, but looking at it up close, it was a huge rune formation. The golden-armored deity held a huge bronze mirror in his hand, and a long saber hung at his waist. After it appeared, its eyes released 2 rays of light that could cut through the void, and it swept around, as if it was looking for something. The moment the golden-armored deity appeared, Luo Fan knew that something was wrong. With a thought, he activated the invisibility technique that he had comprehended from the untainted world. His entire body completely blended into the boundless flames around him and disappeared without a trace, as if he did not exist. At this moment, seeing the golden-armored deity's eyes shining with golden light, he knew that his actions must have triggered some sort of reaction. The reason why the golden-armored deity came out to search for the source of the reaction was him. However, he knew very little about this formation. However, he didn't know if the golden-armored deity was the divine ability or incarnation of a powerful being in the heaven realm, or if it was some kind of change of the formation itself. If it was the former, then it meant that there was an astonishingly powerful expert in the heavenly realm. Naturally, things would be a bit troublesome. However, if it was the latter, then the situation would be different. The appearance of the golden-armored deity might be the best opportunity for him to understand the formation. After observing carefully, Luo Fan's mind was filled with joy. The golden-armored deity looked majestic, and the aura around him was extremely vast. However, his expression was a bit dull, and even the golden light that shone from his eyes seemed to be a bit sluggish. From this, it seemed that the golden-armored deity was just some kind of change of the formation itself, and not the divine ability or incarnation of a powerful being in the heavenly realm. Although he had a rough guess in his heart, this matter was of great importance, and Luo Fan had no choice but to be cautious. Thus, with a thought, he raised his hand from his invisible position and waved. The boundless heat that filled the void suddenly condensed, forming a 3-legged golden crow that was tens of thousands of feet tall. The 3-legged golden crow was a powerful creature born from the sun of the untainted world. If it released its divine ability, it could even replace the sun and provide the untainted world with endless true fire of the sun and the essence of the sun. Although the essence of the sun here was different from the sun of the untainted world, the 3-legged golden crow was still a 3-legged golden crow. Its form and essence were in line with the supreme great Tao, and contained some kind of mysterious profoundness. Using the boundless heat from the sun to condense its body, it naturally merged with the great Tao of the universe, and naturally possessed some kind of power that other forms did not possess. In an instant, boundless flames covered the sky and the earth. Even the boundless heat, flames, and radiation from the sun's core were completely pushed away by the flames, causing the 3-legged golden crow to form a spherical void with a diameter of tens of thousands of feet. Due to Luo Fan's divine ability, the 3-legged golden crow's eyes were filled with an indescribable intelligence. The entire golden crow was like a real being, and it opened its mouth and let out an earth-shattering cry. Although the cry was the cry of a crow, it was like an emperor above the 9 heavens issuing an order that could not be disobeyed. It was filled with an aura that could not be resisted. With the appearance of the golden crow, the golden-armored deity's eyes narrowed. The 2 rays of golden light from his eyes turned and covered the golden crow. The golden crow had endless divine abilities, so it would not be easily seen through by the searching golden light. With just a tremble and a flap of its wings, the boundless heat from the sun's core condensed into a huge bronze bell. It blocked the golden light and even crashed towards the golden-armored deity. The bronze bell was tens of thousands of feet tall and was completely condensed from the heat of the flames. It looked extremely ancient, and there were countless simple but mysterious patterns engraved on it. After it appeared, the entire void trembled slightly, as if even time and space had frozen. Under the control of the golden light, the two rays of golden light became like ribbons. They began to circle around the bronze bell, forming a spiral shape. In the end, they drilled into the bottom of the bronze bell and disappeared without a trace. The speed of the bronze bell was not fast. However, for some reason, the golden-armored deity seemed to be slow to react. He only reacted when the bronze bell arrived in front of him and was about to cover his head. He withdrew the golden light from his eyes and waved the bronze mirror in his hand. Countless runes were emitted from the bronze mirror and rushed towards the bronze bell, condensed from flames like a river of runes. Although the bronze bell, condensed from flames, was the three-legged golden crow's divine ability and possessed incredible power, it was only a divine ability after all. Under the impact of the river of runes, it did not have much ability to resist and was directly drowned by the river of runes. There were many runes in the river, but they formed an incomparably complete whole that possessed incredible power. Under the impact of the river, the bronze bell was directly smashed into countless pieces. They were completely swallowed by the runes, assimilated, and finally disappeared without a trace. After the river destroyed the bronze bell, it paused for a moment and twisted slightly as if it was alive. Then, as if it had finally discovered the three-legged golden crow, it directly rushed towards the three-legged golden crow. After the three-legged golden crow had been condensed by Luo Fan, it had received the blessing of the universe's great path and possessed a certain kind of spirituality. Its combat instincts were not inferior to any other living creature. In fact, because its spirituality was only focused on combat, its combat ability was even stronger, and it could unleash the various divine abilities bestowed upon it by the Great Path. Immediately, the three-legged golden crow let out another loud cry. Boundless flames spewed out from its wings, condensing into 365 fireballs in the void. Each of these fireballs was different from the other 365 fireballs. Each of them had a unique temperature, size, and even the flames on top of each fireball were unique. The position of the 365 fireballs was also very particular. They arranged themselves into an indescribably mysterious form in the void. It seemed like an extremely complicated formation, but it also seemed like they were scattered randomly. Any two fireballs communicated with each other through an extremely mysterious method. The power between any two fireballs complemented each other, influenced each other, and promoted each other. In the mysterious form that the fireballs formed, there was an extremely obscure but extremely mysterious power that appeared out of thin air. When the 365 fireballs appeared, the rune river from the copper mirror in the golden-armored deity's hand rushed over. The two collided. In an instant, the rune river seemed to have rushed into an extremely vast world. It suddenly shrank rapidly and continued to extend. It was as if it had rushed into a thin thread between the 365 fireballs. Although it exploded with an unparalleled power that had the mysterious power to disintegrate, devour, and assimilate all power, it could not shake the 365 fireballs at all. It could not pass through the formation formed by the 365 fireballs and hurt the three-legged golden crow. The three-legged golden crow's eyes, which were formed by flames, suddenly trembled. It was extremely agile, as if it was revealing an indescribable joy. It flapped its wings again, and the 365 fireballs flew forward in a fixed form. In the blink of an eye, they had enveloped the entire rune river, and even the golden-armored deity was enveloped within them. Although it was extremely likely that the golden-armored deity was just a transformation of the huge formation, it was still a specialized battle after all. At this moment, its reaction was extremely fast. With another shake of the copper mirror, the rune river was directly cut off from the source of the copper mirror. Then, it suddenly spewed out an extremely condensed five-colored brilliance. As soon as the five-colored brilliance appeared, the boundless heat in the surroundings seemed to be distorted by an indescribable power. It became circles and began to swim around the five-colored brilliance. After the five-colored brilliance left the copper mirror, it rapidly expanded. In the blink of an eye, it was like a huge light screen. It was so huge that it could envelop the huge formation formed by the 365 fireballs and even the three-legged golden crow. There was an invisible soft sound. The huge formation formed by the 365 fireballs was directly enveloped by the five-colored light screen. Then, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had been swept into another space. However, the five-colored light screen did not stop there. Instead, it continued to move forward at an unimaginable speed. It did not stop at all and arrived before the three-legged golden crow. With a swoosh, it swept the three-legged golden crow into it as well. The entire process was as smooth as flowing water. It was as if the 365 fireballs were just illusions, and the three-legged golden crow was just an inanimate object. They didn't show any signs of resisting the attacks, nor did they show any signs of stopping. After the five-colored brilliance swept into the 365 fireballs and the three-legged golden crow, it retracted and turned back into a five-colored brilliance. Slowly, as if it was pulling something extremely heavy, it gradually shrunk back. So that's how it is. At this moment, Luo Fan, who was watching from the side, had a look of realization and shock in his eyes. He had seen every single detail of the battle just now and remembered it in his heart. While he was amazed by the golden armor deity's abilities, the three-legged golden crow's abilities had also left him dumbfounded. Although the three-legged golden crow was formed by him, and he was also the one who gave it combat intelligence, its combat instincts were added by the great Tao of this universe, and its various innate abilities were naturally created by the great Tao. The first ability that the three-legged golden crow had used was a bronze bell that could distort space and time. It seemed to be similar to an ultimate treasure in Legends, but its power was too weak and could not be compared to the ultimate treasure in Legends. As a result, the golden armored deity had used the bronze mirror to destroy it. However, the technique that the three-legged golden crow had used for the second time, the 365 fireballs, had truly shocked him. How was that a fireball? It was clearly 365 miniature stars, miniature suns, or, in other words, they were the stars that shone in the night sky of this universe. The formation formed by the 365 fireballs was clearly a mysterious formation formed with the help of the 365 stars in this universe. The various mysterious powers of the formation were somewhat similar to a certain mysterious formation in myths and legends. All these changes were beyond Luo Fan's expectations. It also allowed Luo Fan to peek into some of the mysteries of the great Tao of this universe. It suddenly made him feel that this universe did not seem to be much lower than the untainted world. As for the five-colored light that the golden armored deity had released at the end, it was indeed his first time seeing it. However, he instantly understood the nature of the five-colored light. It was clearly the legendary five-color divine light. It had the power to destroy everything. It was normal for it to be able to sweep the three-legged golden crow and the mysterious formation into it. However, the three-legged golden crow had been strengthened by the great Tao of this universe. How could it be defeated so easily? The moment the five-color divine light was about to be pulled into the bronze mirror, the five-color divine light suddenly shook. It was as if an extremely powerful force was constantly struggling and attacking the divine light. In the blink of an eye, the five-color divine light collapsed and endless flames spewed out. The 365 huge fireballs were the first to appear. Then, a three-legged golden crow that had shrunk to half its size and looked slightly dispirited appeared. There seemed to be anger in the three-legged golden crow's eyes. After it appeared, it did not leave. Instead, it turned its wings and swatted at the golden armored deity. As it moved, the mysterious formation formed by the 365 huge fireballs suddenly changed direction and directly enveloped the golden armored deity. After the golden armored deity was enveloped by the fireballs, he seemed to be affected by an indescribably powerful rule. It also seemed as if he had entered another space. He began to shrink rapidly. In the blink of an eye, he had shrunk to the size of a speck of dust. Facing the fireballs, it was as if his original size was facing the stars. Afterwards, the fireballs began to ripple violently. Countless rays of light shot out from each of the fireballs, covering the sky as they charged towards the golden-armored deity. The golden-armored deity constantly shook the bronze mirror in his hand and emitted rays of five-color divine light. He continuously blocked the impact of the light on his body. Unfortunately, although the five-color divine light was mysterious, the light emitted by the 365 fireballs was even more numerous. In the end, the five-color divine light was unable to extinguish all the light. In the end, under the bombardment of the endless light, the five-color divine light suddenly collapsed and turned into countless tiny runes. In the end, they were completely annihilated by the impact of the light and disappeared without a trace. When the three-legged golden crow saw this, it let out an extremely excited and joyful cry. Its entire body trembled and it flew up into the sky, dancing happily. At this moment, countless runes suddenly flashed below. The huge magic array formed by 500 billion runes appeared once again. It suddenly radiated a boundless brilliance and formed a huge rune arm in the void. It suddenly reached up and grabbed the huge golden crow in an instant. The three-legged golden crow suddenly let out a terrified cry and struggled even more violently. However, it could not break free from a rune arm at all. The rune arm suddenly clenched. With a soft poof, the three-legged golden crow was crushed by the giant hand. Its entire body suddenly collapsed and turned into countless flames that scattered in all directions. In the end, it finally merged with the endless flames and red light in the surroundings. It disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared in the first place. After the three-legged golden crow disappeared, the formation formed by 365 fireballs also suddenly collapsed and turned into countless flame fragments that merged with the surroundings. After doing all this, the rune hand shrunk back into the huge formation. After that, the 500 billion rune formation did not disappear, but continued to flicker. The 500 billion runes lit up one by one, and then restored to their original appearance one by one. Although the speed of the 500 billion runes alternating was extremely fast, it still took a long time. As a result, the huge formation was displayed for around 10 minutes before it returned to its normal state. Then, it gradually disappeared into the void as if it had never existed. The whole process was only around 10 minutes, which was very short for ordinary people. But for Luo Fan, it was enough for him to completely memorize the 500 billion runes. Because there were too many runes, the structure was too complicated, and the information contained was too much, so he still could not completely understand the mysteries within. However, he only needed to spend a certain amount of time to fully understand the mysteries and then completely grasp the essence of the formation. Chapter 575, 100 Clans, Legend Chapter 615, 100 Clans, it's as I expected. Although the last transformation of this formation is powerful, it consumes a lot of energy. That's why it only appeared after the first transformation was broken, and it takes a lot of time to recover. After Luo Fan memorized the 500 billion runes in his mind, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. An ordinary person's brain had an incredible capacity. Although Luo Fan was only formed by a thought, he had at least reached the itinerant immortal realm. So the capacity of his brain was naturally not something an ordinary person could compare to. Although the 500 billion runes were a lot, they did not pose too much pressure to him. Since he had already memorized the 500 billion runes, Luo Fan naturally would not continue to waste time outside the formation. With a casual grab, the surrounding heat quickly gathered, and in an instant, a mysterious formation formed by 5,000 runes was formed in front of him. This was the formation that had appeared when Eggface had ascended to the immortal realm. After this formation was formed, the formation formed by 500 billion runes suddenly shook, and suddenly, a ray of light rushed up toward the formation formed by 5,000 runes. In the blink of an eye, the small formation was enveloped, forming a passageway that was neither too big nor too small. After the passageway was formed, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He lifted his foot and stepped onto the passageway. Naturally, Luo Fan's ability was far from what Gooden could compare to. Although he was also using the guidance of the light pillar to step into the formation, Luo Fan had more autonomy. On the light pillar, he lifted his foot and stepped lightly, as if he was walking on an ordinary road, and slowly walked toward the main body of the formation. The small formation that Luo Fan had casually formed was closely attached to Luo Fan's feet, and as Luo Fan advanced, it continuously approached the huge formation. After a few minutes, Luo Fan arrived at the main body of the formation. At this moment, at the end of the light pillar, there were no runes like before. Instead, there was a door that just happened to allow one person to pass through. There was a vast aura faintly seeping out from the door. There was also a faint fragrance, as if the real celestial realm was behind the door. Luo Fan already knew about the secret of the light pillar, so he did not hesitate at all. He directly stepped through the door as if it was an ordinary door. The moment he stepped through the door, a strange ripple of space-time swept past his body. At the same time, extremely dense, acquired origin energy of the world surged over. The sounds of wild beasts and the fragrance of various plants instantly enveloped Luo Fan. The door that allowed him to enter collapsed the moment he entered, disappearing without a trace, as if it had never been there in the first place. So, this is the heavenly realm. Luo Fan looked around, and could not help but sigh inexplicably. There was a kind of surprise, a kind of realization, a kind of admiration, a kind of shock, and a kind of faint, inexplicable disappointment in his sigh. This was a boundless world. He was at the top of a mountain, and his surroundings were filled with ancient trees and forests that had a long history. There were all sorts of birds and beasts that he had never seen before flying in the sky. Further up, there was a cloudless blue sky, and a dazzling sun hung in the west of the blue sky. It looked similar to the chaotic world to a certain extent, but it was more like an expansion of the earth. Luo Fan was naturally very clear about the nature of the heavenly realm. He knew that it was an extremely complicated and mysterious rune formation. To be able to construct such a complete and vast world within the formation was naturally shocking and worthy of admiration. However, there was still a gap from what he had expected. First of all, the world was still filled with the Houtian Yuan Qi of the world. It was the Xiantian Yuan Qi that was one level lower than the Xiantian Yuan Qi. It could not replenish the Yuan Qi that was lost with the passage of time, not to mention the more advanced chaotic Yuan Qi. Although the Houtian Yuan Qi of the world was tens of thousands of times denser than that of the earth, but it still belonged to the Houtian realm. For Luo Fan, it was still a smelly dish. At most, it was just a less smelly dish. Secondly, although the strength of the space in this world was much stronger than the space on the earth, it could not even be compared to a middle-class world. At most, it was only slightly stronger than a small chiliocosm. Although the strength of the space could allow living beings of the same cultivation level to display stronger power, but it limited the highest achievements of these living beings so that these living beings could not truly transcend. Thirdly, the flow of time in this world was not faster than the flow of time on the earth, but was only 165% of the flow of time on the earth. In other words, a year on the earth was only one day in this world. This was simply inconceivable to Luo Fan. So, one day in the heaven is 1 year on the earth like this. Luo Fan finally could not help but sigh. Although the flow of time was 165% faster, the creatures living in it could live longer than those living in the outside world, compared to those living in the outside world. But what was the point of that? The lifespan of these creatures would not be increased by even a second because of this. It seems that this place is not the residence of those who have truly transcended. At most, it is just a greenhouse. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. Looking at the world around him again, Luo Fan suddenly felt that everything was so tasteless. With a thought, his body floated up and soon arrived at an altitude of thousands of miles. Although this world was just a greenhouse in Luo Fan's eyes, it was still quite perfect. The distance between the heaven and the earth was at least 10,000 miles. Thousands of miles high in the sky was not very high. When he arrived at the sky, he looked around. Although the earth had countless ups and downs, with countless mountains and valleys, rivers and hills, he could see far away with a glance. Obviously, the entire earth was flat, not like the earth, which was a sphere. With a thought, he sent out his senses and did his best to spread them out in all directions, carefully sensing the world around him. The strength of the heaven and the earth was only slightly stronger than that of the minor chiliocosm. It did not hinder Luo Fan's senses very much. Therefore, the range that Luo Fan could sense was extremely wide. In the blink of an eye, the surface of the earth that was several times the size of the earth was included in his senses. After the earth was included in his senses, Luo Fan carefully analyzed it, and his understanding of the entire heaven and the earth became deeper and deeper. He also had a more and more certain guess about the reason for the existence of this heaven and the earth. It seems that this heaven and the earth are to preserve something, to wait for something to return. This is the only reason why this heaven and the earth are so strange. This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. The acquired yuan qi that filled the entire heaven and earth was so rich, and the attacks of the many living beings that existed in this heaven and the earth were so weak. It was as if they were restricted by the heaven and the earth, unable to cause too much damage. In addition, the species in this heaven and the earth were unimaginably complete. Although he only sensed the area of a few earths, the living beings that existed on this earth included almost every species that had appeared in the history of the earth, even those that had gone extinct on the earth. There were even countless strange living beings that Luo Fan had never heard of or seen before. These living beings lived on this earth, and there was some kind of invisible force that separated them from each other. It was very similar to the animal sanctuaries on earth, and it was obvious that it was to protect the many living beings here. These various circumstances, combined with the strange nature of this heaven and earth that Luo Fan felt was enough to confirm his previous opinion. Just as Luo Fan was analyzing the nature of this heaven and earth, his heart suddenly moved. He had suddenly sensed a human settlement that was hundreds of millions of kilometers away from here. This human settlement was very strange. It attracted Luo Fan's strong interest. Since he was interested, Luo Fan naturally did not hesitate. With a thought, he turned into a long streak of light and shot toward the settlement. Luo Fan turned into a long streak of light and flew at an extremely fast speed. In a few breaths, he arrived above the settlement. Such a dazzling long streak of light, naturally, could not be hidden from the residents of the settlement below. In an instant, the sound of a horn soared into the sky. The originally peaceful settlement suddenly became extremely tense. Hundreds of people from the settlement rode on all kinds of tools and rushed into the sky, heading toward the long streak of light that Luo Fan had turned into. Although this settlement was just a settlement in Luo Fan's eyes, in fact, it was a huge city that covered an area of tens of thousands of kilometers. In this city, there were tens of millions of people living there, and it was not much different from a country. However, what interested Luo Fan was not what was said above, but the residents living in these settlements. Although they had black hair and black eyes, and all kinds of characteristics were similar to the people of Huaxia, each of them was at least 10 meters tall. Impressively, it was a group of giants. In the ancient legends, there seemed to be a kind of giant race that once existed on Earth. Could it be these? Luo Fan thought as he looked at the giants that were coming toward him. Although the long streak of light that he had turned into was extremely fast, he could control it freely. With a thought, the long streak of light paused and directly froze. With another turn, it transformed into his figure. Seeing his figure appear, the giants that were riding on all kinds of tools and charging over with traces of murderous intent could not help but be stunned. Then, they became indescribably excited. The traces of murderous intent that originally existed disappeared without a trace, turning into an indescribable kind of expectation. The leader of the group immediately shouted. Everyone put away the various weapons in their hands. They quickly adjusted themselves in the air and lined up to welcome him. Seeing this, the leader who shouted before came forward and spoke to Luo Fan in a very strange and extremely ancient language with an extremely respectful voice. Naturally, Luo Fan had never heard of these words before. However, with Luo Fan's cultivation realm, as soon as the words came out of the giant's mouth, he instantly understood the meaning contained in the giant's words, allowing him to clearly understand the giant's words. We didn't know that a mortal was coming. We didn't go out to greet you. Please forgive us, immortal. The giant was 5 or 6 times taller than Luo Fan, like a small mountain. Bowing so respectfully and speaking in a low voice was quite comical. However, the surrounding giants did not have any dissatisfaction. They even faintly felt a little envious. They envied that this leader could speak to an immortal. How shocking was Luo Fan's intelligence! In an instant, he analyzed many things from this. He immediately said, I came here to find a type of spiritual medicine. You don't have to be so courteous. Of course, the language he used was his usual Chinese, not the language used by the giant. However, his will was directly attached to it, so that all living beings who heard this language, whether they understood Chinese or not, whether they had complete intelligence or not, would understand what he was saying. When the giant heard Luo Fan's words, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed, but he didn't despair. He said, Our White Eater clan has lived here for thousands of years, and we have collected all kinds of spirit medicines nearby. If a mortal doesn't mind, I wonder if he can come to our clan and see if we have any spirit medicines that a mortal needs? Hearing this, Luo Fan smiled, sure. Although he could understand the so-called Eater tribe by observing from afar, since he was interested, there was no harm in learning more about them. Moreover, he was quite interested in the purpose of the Eater tribe. Perhaps he could learn about the history of this heavenly realm and other things through the Eater tribe. Seeing Luo Fan agree, the giant was extremely excited. He immediately shouted behind him. Everyone cheered. Then, they used all kinds of flying tools and respectfully invited Luo Fan to the settlement below. Luo Fan smiled slightly and followed these giants, who were 5 or 6 times taller than him, but appeared very obedient and respectful as they descended. After a while, they landed at the center of the settlement below. The settlement was built for giants, so everything was naturally very large. When Luo Fan arrived at this place, he sensed an atmosphere coming from everywhere. He could even faintly sense the spirit of an unknown number of people gathered on these buildings. These people have worked hard to survive in this heavenly realm, but they do not know that this heavenly realm is actually a greenhouse. They're only kept here to wait for certain existences to return and carry out certain plans. Luo Fan sensed all this and could not help but sigh. The spirit that was attached to these buildings was none other than the attachment and feelings that the generations of barbarians had for these buildings. The existence of these mental energies was enough to show that countless people used their most passionate emotions to fight for the existence of the settlement. Luo Fan's stature was several times smaller than these giants, but when he stood among them, he didn't seem short. On the contrary, it was as if he was among ordinary people. He wasn't particularly protruding, but he didn't seem weak either. This was naturally not because Luo Fan was emitting his own aura to avoid the suppression caused by the strong contrast of his stature. With Luo Fan's realm, he didn't need to do so. The transcendent aura on his body was enough to make him not the slightest bit inferior to anyone in the crowd. Even if the giants were 10 or 100 times bigger, the situation would not change. After landing, the other giants scattered. Only a few dozen giants stayed, with the leading giant and Luo Fan to the warehouse. Along the way, Luo Fan asked random questions, but the giant did not dare to answer casually. No matter what Luo Fan asked, the giant did his best to tell him everything he knew. Although he was a little curious as to why Luo Fan would ask about this kind of common knowledge that all living beings in this heavenly realm knew, The difference between him and Luo Fan was too great. It was so great that he did not dare to raise any objections. Instead, he answered everything with all his heart and did not dare to be careless. As the giant explained, Luo Fan gradually understood the situation in this heavenly realm. The Eater tribe was one of the 800 Ling tribes in this heavenly realm, and they were considered the weakest. The 800 Ling tribes in this heavenly realm did not include all the living beings in this heavenly realm, but only the intelligent ones. More specifically, it was the various races of the human race. Among them were the three-eyed humans, the long-eared humans, the eight-armed humans, and other legendary races that Luo Fan had never seen before. Moreover, these 800 Ling tribes did not include every human race. Apart from these 800 Ling tribes, there were countless other races in this heavenly realm that were not famous, too weak, and had a small population. As for how many of these races there were, no one could say for sure. If there was an exception, it would probably be the legendary saint. When the giant said the word saint, Luo Fan was slightly stunned. He felt that he seemed to have grasped some key points. He asked further. The giant leader was rather surprised that Luo Fan did not know about the saint. However, he still explained respectfully. It turned out that the saint was a legend in this heavenly realm. In the legends, the saint had infinite magical powers. He knew everything, was omnipotent, and could not be defeated by thousands of tribulations. He was immortal. In fact, the entire heavenly realm was created by the saint. However, that was only a legend. In this heavenly realm, no one had ever seen a saint, not even immortals. According to the legends, this saint seems to be the kind of saint who achieved primordial chaos Tao fruit in the primordial world. Could it be that? Chapter 576. At Luo Fan's level, his control over his body and mind had already reached an unbelievable level. With this level of control, if he didn't want others to see through his thoughts and emotions, no matter how intelligent one was, they would not be able to see through him. Search for the latest updates here, not to mention that the White Eater's intelligence was only average. Therefore, in the White Eater's eyes, Luo Fan's calm and natural demeanor was indeed like that of an immortal. As they spoke, the giants gradually led Luo Fan to the center of the settlement, arriving outside the building. This building was the tallest and widest in the entire settlement of the White Eater tribe. Even from outside the building, one could vaguely sense a powerful spiritual energy coming from within. With a thought, Luo Fan instantly sensed the countless powerful mechanisms within the building, as well as a powerful presence hidden within. There were also teams of giant warriors patrolling the area around the building. Vigilance appeared on every giant's face. The giant who had led Luo Fan oversaid a few words to the giant guarding the door. The giant then opened the door, allowing Luo Fan and the others to enter. As soon as the door opened, the aura contained within the building skyrocketed. Even the giants could not help but take a deep breath, a strange smile appearing on their faces as if they were enjoying it. Luo Fan and the giant leader stepped into the building together. There were countless spirit herbs inside, and every one of them was a rare existence even in the heavenly realm. Luo Fan's senses were extremely powerful, and his ability to analyze things had reached an earth-shattering level. He had only sensed the entire White Eater settlement for a moment, but he had already analyzed almost all of the White Eater's forces. When he stepped into the warehouse, he instantly knew the exact number of spirit herbs in the warehouse. He even knew the difficulty of finding each spirit herb, and the time it took for the Baron cannibals to find each spirit herb appeared in his mind without reservation. It was precisely because of these various analyses that he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. With the strength of the White Eater tribe, it would take at least 100,000 years to collect so many spirit herbs, even if they exhausted the entire tribe's strength. And this was when the White Eaters had already reached this scale 100,000 years ago. The flow of time in the heavenly realm was 365 times that of the outside world. To the outside world, 100,000 years would be 36.5 million years. According to the theories of later generations, The earliest human beings that existed on Earth today appeared millions of years ago. Although there was a huge gap between the theory and reality, it was quite accurate in terms of time. The White Eater tribe had lived in the track and field for 100,000 years, which proved that the White Eater tribe had existed in the outside world for at least 36.5 million years. This meant that if the White Eater tribe had appeared on Earth before, they would have been at least one generation ago, or even several generations ago. According to the calculation of strength, the longer a tribe lived in the heavenly realm, the stronger they should be. This was the rule of the heavenly realm to preserve the tribe. The White Eater tribe's strength was at the bottom of the 800 spirit tribes in the heavenly realm. Even if this was the White Eater tribe's humility, it would not be too far from the truth. Therefore, the heavenly realm had existed for at least hundreds of times longer than the White Eater tribe. Otherwise, there would not have been 800 spirit tribes in the heavenly realm. According to this situation, the entire heavenly realm could be estimated to have existed for at least several billion years. A few billion years. Even to the current Luo fan, this period of time was extremely long. It was even possible that this heavenly realm had appeared not long after Earth was formed. If one speculated boldly, it was very likely that this heavenly realm had appeared before Earth. What happened back then? Why did the legendary saint or other great mediums create such a heavenly realm? Why did they spend so much effort to preserve these intelligent races? Where do they go now? What kind of plan do they have? All kinds of doubts constantly flashed in Luo Fan's mind. The previous speculations seemed a little far-fetched and taken for granted, but with Luo Fan's spirit that could faintly sense the secrets of heaven, he knew clearly that even if there was a gap between the speculation and the truth, the gap would not be too big. This was the supreme confidence that came from Luo Fan's cultivation of the primordial unity gold element realm. The strong would never doubt their own judgment. As for Luo Fan, he was the strongest person in the entire untainted land. Even in the universe where Earth was located, in the heavenly realm, he was also a supreme existence at this level. How could he not have confidence in his own judgment? Moreover, the faint aura of the entire heavenly realm coincided with his guess to a certain extent, which made him even more convinced that his guess was correct. With a guess about the time of the heavenly realm's existence, Luo Fan moved his mind and carefully sensed some kind of mysterious connection that came from an extremely distant place in the heavenly realm. The ones who knew the most about the heavenly realm were not the so-called 800 spirit tribes who mingled among the mortals, but those who were high above and were called immortals by these spirit tribes. They were the cultivators who ascended from Earth. The mysterious connection that Luo Fan sensed at this moment came from the perfected person of the Golden Core who had ascended to the heavenly realm previously. Luo Fan had urged Gooden, who had advanced from a child beggar to the Golden Core within 3 days. Gooden was originally just a child beggar. Because of the cultivation method that Luo Fan had imparted to him, he distorted time and gathered endless postnatal chi of heaven and earth. With the help of the supreme, mystical ability, he managed to achieve the Golden Core. By achieving the Golden Core in this way, whether Luo Fan intended or not, his Golden Core naturally carried a little mark of Luo Fan. As long as Luo Fan wanted to, he could vaguely sense the location of the mark no matter how far away it was. As long as he could sense its location, he would naturally be able to find other ascendants and find out what Luo Fan wanted to know. So it's there. Luo Fan smiled slightly and turned his head to the northwest. His eyes seemed to penetrate the warehouse through the endless distance and saw another world at the end of the northwest. Since he already knew, Luo Fan didn't have any thoughts of entangling with this White Eater. He casually grabbed something that was extremely precious in the depths of this warehouse. But it wasn't the most precious thing in this warehouse. It was like soft mud, but it was the size of a fist. It crossed the void and directly appeared in his hand. P.S. Tonight, I finally enjoyed the legendary misfortune of losing my words. At around 11 o'clock, when he was typing nearly 5,000 words, his hands were careless, and he did not aim at the letter keys when typing. After a few times, a pop-up window flashed, and the document suddenly closed. When he opened it again, all the words that he had worked hard for the whole night were lost. No matter how hard he tried to find them, he could not find them. His mood instantly became extremely bad. It took a lot of willpower to retype these 2,000 words. Alas, it was so painful. Chapter 577. This is the spirit herb I need, so I'll take it. Now, you can tell me what you want. If it's not too much, I'll grant you your wish. Luo Fan raised his hand and put the item into the world within his sleeve that he'd casually opened up, speaking calmly. Search for the latest updates here. He naturally knew that the reason these freeloaders had invited him here so enthusiastically and brought him to the most precious storehouse of their race for him to choose from was not because of respect for the so-called immortals, but because they had a request. Since he wasn't in the mood to waste any more time here, he naturally didn't hide anything and went straight to the point. When the giant heard this, he couldn't help but be slightly taken aback, evidently not expecting Luo Fan to reveal the topic so directly. However, he was only slightly taken aback for a moment before realization dawned on him. In fact, it even became a matter of course. After all, with Luo Fan's status and his status, why would Luo Fan need to be courteous with him? It was only normal for him to speak so directly. If Luo Fan had spoken at length like a normal person and asked him questions in secret, that would have been strange. After a moment of realization, the giant became extremely agitated again. He immediately knelt down on the ground, and with a boom, the ground shook violently. Then he slammed his head on the ground, and with another boom, a large patch of the ground was dyed red. He'd been so attentive and respectful, even bringing Luo Fan to the most precious palace of his race without a care for anything else. Wasn't it all for Luo Fan's words? May the immortal pass on the path of immortality to my race. The giant's voice trembled slightly. It was obvious that these words had been weighing on his heart for who knew how long. Now that he finally had the chance to say them, his agitation reached an indescribable level. When Luo Fan heard this, he was slightly taken aback. He had all sorts of guesses about the giant's intentions, but he hadn't expected the giant to make such a request. When he understood, he couldn't help but laugh. Ha! Don't tell me you want to exchange for the priceless path to immortality with just a spiritual herb that is considered precious in the heavenly realm. As he spoke, he casually waved his hand and fished out a fist-sized strange substance that looked like soft mud from his universe in his sleeve. This item was located in the deepest part of the warehouse. It was extremely precious, but it wasn't the most precious spirit medicine in the entire warehouse. Even so, it was far from being as precious as the path to longevity. How could it be exchanged for the path to longevity? When the giant heard Luo Fan's words, there wasn't the slightest bit of dissatisfaction on his face. There was only an expression of anticipation. However, his excitement and trembling continued. He once again fiercely knocked his head on the ground, causing the entire warehouse to tremble slightly. He even nearly triggered the various mechanisms in the warehouse. After kowtowing, he said, "This lowly one naturally doesn't dare to think so." He was only asking for the immortal's benevolence, but he did not think that he was exchanging spiritual herbs. Although my clan was born with supernatural abilities that could be passed down for a long time in the heavenly realm, we couldn't increase our lifespan. No matter how powerful our supernatural abilities are, it is difficult for our lifespan to exceed 300 years. Ever since we appeared in the heavenly realm 180,000 years ago, my clan knew that this was our clan's greatest sorrow. Thus, since the first clan leader, my clan has had a clan rule. If any clan member finds an immortal, they can use everything in our clan to seek the path to longevity. Immortal's benevolence. As he spoke, he continuously knocked his head on the ground. The ground was the warehouse's floor. It was extremely hard, and there were even faint outlines of many strange lines that could borrow the endless acquired chi of heaven and earth to increase one's chi defense. However, as the giant fiercely knocked his head on the ground, a large pit gradually appeared. It caused the surrounding ground and the entire room to collapse. The giant's blood gushed out of the pit like a waterfall under this ferocious attack. It was an extremely tragic sight. Benevolence, Luo Fan muttered to himself. A look of realization appeared in his eyes. Now that he heard the giant's words, he gradually understood some of the questions that he couldn't figure out before. Why was the giant so respectful and attentive the moment he discovered him? Why did the giant bring him to the most precious warehouse in the entire clan after knowing that he wanted spiritual herbs? Moreover, the person guarding the warehouse didn't stop him from entering at all. All of this was clearly set by the clan rules that had been passed down since ancient times. After understanding all of this, Luo Fan suddenly had a new plan and casually said, "Call your clan leader out. Some things can't be decided by a little warrior leader like you." This giant obviously couldn't be the person with the highest status in the White Eater race. From his previous actions, he was at most the leader of the guards or other combat teams. After the giant discovered and welcomed Luo Fan, no one with a higher status appeared. Naturally, it was not because the White Eater race was disrespectful to Luo Fan. Instead, it was because they were too respectful to Luo Fan. Without Luo Fan's orders, no one dared to disturb Luo Fan, not even the clan leader with the highest status. At this moment, Luo Fan already had the intention to teach the White Eater race the path to immortality. Perhaps the giant before him could agree to what he wanted to do under the clan rules, but he was not the person with the highest status, so it was not appropriate to tell him. The giant couldn't help but be overjoyed. He knew that Luo Fan's words meant that there was hope for the White Eater race to immortality. After saying that, he directly took out an item and activated it. After emitting a strange light, it directly passed through the void and went somewhere in the city. Luo Fan knew that this must be to inform the clan leader of the White Eater race. With Luo Fan's ability, he naturally could easily know where the clan leader was and how the clan leader came. However, he had no interest in sensing this and just waited quietly. After a few breaths, a giant's voice sounded outside. "White Eater clan leader, White Eater, request to see Immortal. Immortal, please grant me an audience." Luo Fan said lightly, "Come in." Although the voice was suppressed, Luo Fan could still easily sense the excitement and nervousness in it. Then, a strange-looking giant in a strange black robe appeared at the warehouse door and walked towards Luo Fan. The giant had a superior aura, and the power contained in his body was more than 10 times stronger than ordinary golden core perfected masters. However, that was only power. This person's soul power was extremely weak, so he could only live for a few more decades at most. Even with all kinds of spirit medicine to extend his life, he could not live more than 800 years. Chapter 578. An existence that was 10 times stronger than a golden core could only live for 800 years no matter how hard he tried, even after plundering the heavenly realm. How sad was this? It was easy to imagine how unwilling this existence was. "Greetings, Immortal." The moment the giant entered, his body trembled. He seemed to have discovered how powerful and unbelievable Luo Fan was. He immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed without the demeanor of a clan leader. "What he said just now, is it the truth?" Luo Fan asked lightly. There were some words that had to be said, even if they were already certain. The clan leader's expression was very serious. "It is the truth. My clan has a legacy. We are willing to exchange everything for the path of immortality and ensure our clan's eternal existence. If that's the case, then I don't need anything from your clan. I just need you to agree to one condition, and I will teach you the path of immortality." Luo Fan said, "Thank you, Immortal. No matter what the condition is, no matter how many, as long as you say it, we will do it." The clan leader's body trembled slightly. His eyes were filled with indescribable excitement. The giant who was kneeling behind the patriarch also kowtowed vigorously. His excited expression was not any weaker than the patriarch's. They couldn't be blamed. The clan leader would die in a few decades without spiritual medicine. To a powerhouse that was 10 times stronger than a golden core, that kind of unwillingness was enough for him to give up everything in exchange for an unlimited lifespan. Even the giant leader had the strength of a golden core. He naturally wouldn't be satisfied with a few hundred years of life. To be able to extend his lifespan was a great fortune for him. Luo Fan faintly smiled. There's no need to make a decision too early. If this was easy, you wouldn't have to show up. Listen to me first before you make a decision. The clan leader responded, but his expression didn't change at all. He even revealed a sense of determination. It was obvious that no matter what Luo Fan said, he wouldn't change his mind. Luo Fan didn't care. After all, the clan leader had already said that it wasn't up to him to decide. Therefore, he said lightly, I don't need much, just the following. If you cultivate the path of immortality that I have taught you, the white cannibals must not appear before any spirit race for 1,000,000 years. If any of my people appear before the spirit race before the time is up, I will take back the path that I have taught you and destroy your race. Are you willing to keep this condition? If you're willing, I'll teach you the path to immortality. If you're not willing, I can use the same precious elixirs to exchange for the elixirs I took from your clan. When the patriarch heard Luo Fan's words, he could not help but be slightly stunned. These conditions could be said to be harsh and extremely harsh. After all, they couldn't meet or communicate with the spirit race in the outside world for 1,000,000 years. If they violated this rule, the entire race would have to bear the price of extinction. The difficulty of this was beyond everyone's imagination. But it wasn't harsh either. Compared to the entire race, it was so insignificant. It could even be said that it was for the sake of the white cannibal safety. It was a measure to prevent the white cannibals from being oppressed and threatened by the other spirit races. A race that was born with all kinds of remarkable abilities and could even be comparable to powerful cultivators when they grew up. The strongest of them could even be several times stronger than a golden core perfected being. If they learned the path to immortality, they could have a long life. However, to the other spirit races, it would be an extremely huge threat. It was very likely that the white cannibals would be wiped out. From this, it could be seen that if the white cannibals could seal themselves and not communicate with the other spirit races, they could naturally avoid the malice and attacks of the other spirit races. This was naturally a good thing for the white cannibals. As the patriarch of the white cannibals, the giant's intelligence was naturally not bad. With a single thought, he had already clearly considered the pros and cons of this condition. It was precisely because he had clearly considered the pros and cons that he was a little dumbfounded. This condition did not benefit the Celestial in front of him at all. It could even be said that the Celestial was thinking for the white cannibals. This was vastly different from what he had expected. How could he not be stunned for a moment? However, the patriarch's reaction speed was quite astonishing. He suppressed his shock within a breath and immediately knelt. Celestial's order. After Celestial leaves, our race will mobilize all of our power to seal this place within a radius of 10 million miles. We will completely isolate ourselves from the outside world. We will not break the seal until 1,000,000 years have passed. We will not communicate with the spirit races outside. There's no need to swear. Since you've agreed to this condition, I will naturally leave a restriction in the path to immortality. If you violate this condition, my words will be fulfilled, Luo Fan said indifferently. When the clan chief and the giant behind him heard Luo Fan's words, their bodies involuntarily trembled. In their eyes, there was even a kind of shock. Within fear, there was an expression of joy mixed within. He was shocked and terrified because the immortal in front of him could actually do what he said. He had left a seal in the cultivation method that could connect all the living beings who practiced the cultivation method together. Once one of the living beings who practiced the cultivation method touched the condition of the seal, all the living beings who practiced the cultivation method would suffer backlash. What kind of unimaginable ability was that? Such an unimaginable ability meant that the Celestial strength had long surpassed their imagination. How could they not be shocked? How could they not be terrified? Their joy was even simpler. Since the Celestial was so powerful, the path to immortality he spoke of was naturally not fake. The ultimate goal that their race had spent all of their efforts in pursuing for hundreds of thousands of years finally had a chance to be realized. How could they not be overjoyed? As you command, Celestial. Although the patriarch was shocked, he did not hesitate in the slightest and knelt. Luo Fan nodded when he heard this. He then pointed his finger, and a speck of light rushed out of his hand. It rotated in the void and crazily absorbed the surrounding Hotian Yuan Qi. Then, it condensed into hundreds of thousands of complicated characters and patterns in the void. When those characters and diagrams appeared, the entire heavenly realm trembled slightly. There were faint rumbles of thunder in the air, and with Luo Fan's golden and silver eyes, he could easily see that there were hundreds of millions of runes surging in the air. They crazily surged towards the characters and diagrams, erupting with indescribable power to erase those characters and diagrams. Clearly, the appearance of those characters and diagrams had touched a taboo in the heavenly realm. It caused some sort of change in the heavenly realm to erase those characters and diagrams. Chapter 579. The hundreds of millions of runes were extremely mysterious. As soon as they appeared, they surrounded the hundreds of thousands of words and diagrams. They intersected with each other like a very intricate and complicated machine, forming an extremely intricate and strange formation. The formation was extremely pure and had no other purpose other than destruction. When the strange formation appeared, a strange power was generated out of thin air and swarmed toward the hundreds of thousands of words and patterns. The nature of this strange power was very mysterious, and it could not be described with any attribute at all. It only contained an extremely pure will of destruction, and it wanted to completely destroy everything it touched. The entire heavenly realm was created by a huge formation formed by 500 billion runes. Although it was essentially a formation space, it was also a real world. The space-time in this heavenly realm was naturally also real. At this moment, the space-time quietly distorted under the influence of such a pure and powerful power. In an instant, the hundreds of thousands of words and patterns became very illusory, as if they could disappear at any time and collapse into nothingness at any time. The hundreds of thousands of words and patterns were naturally the method of immortality that Luo Fan had created for the white cannibals. Luo Fan's cultivation had long reached the peak of primordial unity gold number, which was 5 or 6 realms higher than the immortal realm of an itinerant immortal. The width of each realm was so great that it could be compared to the distance between heaven and earth. It could be said that Luo Fan, who had reached the peak of primordial unity gold number, could completely wipe out tens of millions of itinerant immortals with a single thought. The essence of immortality in the itinerant immortal realm was no secret to Luo Fan, who had reached such a realm. Even if he wanted to create some cultivation method that could help him cultivate to the itinerant immortal realm based on the life essence of some living beings, he only needed a single thought. Moreover, he had only created a cultivation method that could allow the white cannibals to cultivate to immortality. These hundreds of thousands of words and diagrams were what Luo Fan had created after the patriarch of the white cannibal tribe agreed to his request. The cultivation method had no other special functions, and it was impossible for the cultivator to cultivate some incredible divine ability or the ability to soar into the sky or burrow into the earth. Instead, it simply allowed the freeloaders who cultivated the cultivation method to live longer and longer, and when they reached the peak of their cultivation method, they would be able to live eternally in the world. The heaven art of prolonging life was the name of this cultivation technique. It was also the path to immortality that the entire hermits had been searching for hundreds of thousands of years. When the Baishur patriarch saw the hundreds of thousands of words and pictures, an indescribable excitement surged in his heart. However, after the excitement, he fell into an indescribable panic. It was because he noticed that even though these words were completely written in their Baishur language, and even the diagrams were only ordinary diagrams, he couldn't understand them at all, and he couldn't remember them at all. No matter how hard he tried, as long as he turned his eyes away, he would immediately forget the words and the pictures he had seen a moment ago. Does the heavens want me dead? The panic in the Baishur patriarch's heart grew stronger, and this was the only thought in his mind. After all, the Baishur patriarch's aptitude was astonishing, and he was extremely intelligent. Having a photographic memory was practically second nature to him. In the past, as long as he saw anything and any words, even if they were words he didn't recognize, they would be engraved in the depths of his memory, and he would never forget them for the rest of his life. However, this situation had occurred at this moment. Either the immortal in front of him didn't want him to remember these words and pictures, or the heavens didn't allow him to remember them. If the immortal didn't want him to remember them, he wouldn't have been able to condense these words and pictures. Thus, there was only the second possibility. The heavens didn't allow him to remember these words and pictures. The heavens didn't allow the Bishur tribe to obtain the path to immortality. How could he not panic? How could he not feel a sense of despair? Luo Fan naturally didn't care about the Bishur patriarch's emotions. At this moment, Luo Fan only had a sudden realization and a clear understanding of the workings of the heaven realm. This heavenly realm was formed by a formation, so it naturally had countless mysterious changes. To be able to evolve such a natural, complete, and realistic world, one could imagine how mysterious the formation was. Although Luo Fan had used various methods to memorize the 500 billion profound runes that formed this formation, it was still impossible to completely understand this formation. Through his probing of the heavenly realm, he grasped a certain key and could vaguely see the essence of the formation. If that was all, then it would be normal. In the end, no matter how mysterious it was just a formation. However, in this heavenly realm, he suddenly realized that this formation was most likely created by the legendary saints of this universe. This formation could be said to contain some of the mysteries of the saints. Through a thorough understanding of this formation, he could roughly understand the saints of this world and might even be able to use it as a reference for his main body's cultivation. The vinegar spirit had increased his main body's cultivation. This was what interested Luo Fan. Since it was effective, Luo Fan naturally wouldn't stop. He raised his hand and made a grabbing motion in front of him. In an instant, countless tiny and complicated runes gushed out his 5 fingers like 2 rivers, rushing towards the mysterious formation that had appeared out of thin air. It was invisible to the naked eye, and it was bursting with pure and refined destructive power. These runes belonged to the same system as the runes that formed the formation. They were comprehended by Luo Fan from the formation formed by the 500 billion runes. Although he didn't truly understand the formation, with Luo Fan's cultivation realm, when he memorized the 500 billion runes, he understood the mysteries of a small part of the runes. Combined with the mysteries of the great Tao that he had comprehended in the past, he could naturally use these runes to perform all kinds of incredible magic. The 5 rune rivers contained an extremely large number of runes, and they traversed through the void with great agility. In an instant, they split into 5,000 tiny rune rivers, and the formation that had appeared out of nowhere was instantly divided into countless parts. Almost every rune was separated from the other runes, and they no longer formed a whole. Instead, they were just a collection of runes. The reason why these runes could produce such incredible power was because they formed a whole according to some mysterious method, forming a formation. Chapter 580. The moment the mysterious formation collapsed, the eyes of the Bishur patriarch, who had fallen into despair, suddenly lit up. He felt the hundreds of thousands of words and images turn into a stream of information that rushed into his eyes. In the blink of an eye, it was deeply engraved in his memories, and he would never forget again. This, the heavens have not forsaken the Bishur clan. 2 streaks of tears fell from the clan leader's eyes. An indescribable excitement appeared on his face. At this moment, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the air. More runes were born from the void and quickly condensed in this place. Along with the birth of these runes, specks of multicolored light that would make any living being feel extremely beautiful and alluring appeared out of thin air. All kinds of fragrances that would make anyone feel relaxed and happy also spread out along with the emergence of the multicolored light. These runes that appeared out of thin air intertwined with the runes that Luo Fan had previously scattered. Slowly, some kind of very complicated and mysterious change occurred, as if it was going to cause some kind of very huge change in this world. With a thought, Luo Fan waved his hand and gathered the 5 rivers of runes that had rushed out of his hand into a fist-sized ball. It spun silently and gave off a mysterious ripple. However, it did not stop the runes that had appeared out of nowhere. Instead, he quietly observed the strange changes that the runes were causing to the world. The more he observed, the brighter his eyes became. In the end, he even felt an indescribable shock. This was because the source of all these changes was the formation formed by the 500 billion runes that formed the heavenly realm. It was undergoing a subtle, intricate, and profound change. This change did not increase the number of runes that formed the formation, but it caused an extremely subtle change in the way the runes were formed. It was as if some profound existence was being added to the formation. This situation was very obvious. The formation that had created the heavenly realm was absorbing something to change and evolve itself. The existence that was being absorbed by the heavenly realm was clearly the heaven art of life extension that he had created. In Luo Fan's eyes, the world in front of him was no longer the heavenly realm in the eyes of ordinary people. Instead, it had become a world formed by runes. This heavenly realm was a real world. Of course, the space-time in the heavenly realm was real as well. It was not an illusion formed by runes. The runes that had appeared in front of Luo Fan's eyes could not cover the entire heavenly realm. It only included the warehouse in front of him. However, in this warehouse, the real space and time in the heavenly realm had been completely transformed into runes. The time, space, post-celestial spiritual energy, and other strange energies that existed in the heavenly realm had been redefined by these runes that had appeared out of nowhere. In other words, the space-time in the warehouse had been stripped away from the real heavenly realm. It had become a part of the huge formation that had been formed by the runes. In other words, at this moment, in this place, Luo Fan was in the deepest part of the formation that was changing the most violently. It was also the most mysterious transformation of the formation. This most mysterious change was naturally not something that could be evolved from runes into a world that seemed very complete to ordinary people. Even if there was a rather perfect time and space, and even if it seemed to be exactly the same, but in essence there was no similarity between the Hotian Yuan Qi and other strange energies. For Luo Fan, who could casually open up a mini kiliocosm, this was not a difficult thing. What really interested Luo Fan was the evolution that the formation was currently producing. A formation, no matter how mysterious it was, even if it was so exquisite and profound that it had some kind of spiritual consciousness, was ultimately a dead object. And as long as it was a dead object, it would not be able to cultivate and evolve by itself like a living being. This could be seen from the fact that the magical treasure had such a complete spiritual consciousness that it needed someone to refine it for it to be able to continuously improve. But at this moment, what was happening in front of Luo Fan had completely overturned his previous understanding. This formation was obviously not controlled by anyone, but with its own operation and changes, it was able to constantly improve its own essence, causing the essence of the formation to constantly improve. This was something that Luo Fan had never seen before. How could he not be interested? Luo Fan's eyes flickered with a gold and silver brilliance, and an infinite amount of light and shadow crazily poured out from his eyes. It was obvious that his mind was constantly receiving endless information. This heaven art of prolonging life could not be considered exquisite, but it was impossible that a powerful person or even a saint who could construct such a mysterious formation would not be able to create such a technique. This point, Luo Fan was clearer than anyone else. However, this life extension heavenly art had caused such a huge change in the formation. The reason behind this was something that Luo Fan understood with a slight thought. This must be caused by the heaven art of prolonging life, breaking through some kind of basic rule set up by the heaven realm. Luo Fan had already come to a conclusion in the blink of an eye. The heaven art of prolonging life was after all a method of longevity that Luo Fan had casually created. The existence that the huge formation could absorb to evolve itself was obviously not many. Thus, the change in the warehouse only continued for a few breaths before it slowly subsided. As the change subsided, the space and time in the warehouse once again separated from the main body of the formation, once again merging with the space and time in the outside world. After a few moments, it finally completely merged together, no different from before. Although the change had subsided, but the countless formations that appeared out of nowhere did not instantly disappear. Instead, slowly like silk being spun, the formations disappeared one by one. This caused the various strange phenomena that were caused by the formation to not immediately fade away as the change subsided, but instead became fainter little by little. Finally, it completely disappeared after a few minutes had passed. During this process, it was as if a very precious existence had appeared in this world, and the entire world was happy for the appearance of this existence. The Baishur patriarch finally reacted at this time. He kowtowed like he was pounding garlic, and his tears could no longer be stopped. His voice was choked with sobs, but he continued to express his gratitude to Luo Fan, to the world, and to everything in front of them. The hundreds of thousands of characters and diagrams that Luo Fan had casually condensed with the Heaven Realm's Yuan Qi seemed to have been engraved in the void. They were no longer condensed from Yuan Qi, but had become some kind of natural landscape that would exist forever and could no longer be erased. For Luo Fan, this was just a trace left behind in the Heaven Realm, because these characters had been absorbed by the formation that had created the Heaven Realm. But for the Baishur tribe leader, this Heaven Realm had already acknowledged that their tribe had the right to live forever. How could the Baishur tribe leader not be satisfied? How could he not be excited? Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled faintly. I hope you remember what I said before and don't make a mistake. Don't worry, from today on, the area within a radius of 10 million miles will be sealed for 1,000,000 years. My Baishur tribe will use everything we have to build a formation to seal this world. The Baishur tribe leader said resolutely, as if he was making an oath. Luo Fan quietly smiled, flicked his sleeve, and took a step forward. His figure slowly faded away, and he was clearly about to leave. The Baishur tribe leader was shocked when he saw this, and he bowed. Immortal has done great kindness to my tribe. Please bestow us a name. We will worship you day and night. Chapter 581. The patriarch and the giant behind him knelt for a long time. They only stood up after Luo Fan left. Luo Fan had already explained the function of the life extension heavenly art at the very beginning of the technique, indicating that this technique only had the effect of extending one's lifespan. It didn't have the slightest offensive or defensive ability. However, the patriarch was very satisfied and grateful. After all, the Baishur were born with all kinds of abilities, combat ability, and defense. They were not much weaker than ordinary cultivators. The only thing they lacked was lifespan. The Heaven method of life extension was a cultivation method that pointed directly to longevity, but it was just right for the Baishur. Because it removed all kinds of branches and leaves, it was much easier to cultivate, and the cultivation speed was much faster. It was even more suitable for the Baishur. The Baishur patriarch knew the nature of the life extension heavenly art. While he was excited, he couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for Luo Fan, who had just left. He understood that the immortal just now was much more powerful and unfathomable than he had imagined. The Baishur patriarch forcefully suppressed the excitement in his heart and ordered the giant behind him, "Take out all the materials in the warehouse and gather the elders for a clan meeting." From a moment, the giant met Luo Fan and invited Luo Fan down. He was no longer an ordinary battle leader. Instead, he became the person with the highest status in the Baishur tribe, second only to the patriarch. This was something that no one in the clan, not even the Baishur clan's chief, dared to question. Because of this, the patriarch had indirectly handed the most precious warehouse of the Baishur tribe to the giant. He had even handed the matter of summoning the elders for a meeting to the giant. The giant was taken aback, but he quickly understood that his identity was completely different. He immediately agreed respectfully and began to move. The giant was extremely powerful. Although the warehouse was huge and there were many materials inside, he did not need anyone's help. He could collect everything by himself. Thus, there was no need for anyone else to enter. After instructing the giant leader to get to work, the Baishur leader sat down cross-legged and carefully looked at the hundreds of thousands of words and diagrams in front of him. He impatiently began cultivating. When the entire heavenly realm accepted the life-prolonging heavenly art, he instantly memorized the entire cultivation method, memorizing the hundreds of thousands of characters and the numerous diagrams. However, it was only memorizing it. It didn't mean that he could completely comprehend it. On the other hand, the words and diagrams before him were left behind by an immortal, so they naturally contained various profundities. Faintly, they already contained the profundities of the heavenly art of life extension. If he wanted to comprehend this cultivation technique, he would naturally have to look at it indirectly. These writings were more indirect and easier to comprehend. With this comprehension, he felt that the thick and indescribable power in his body began to quietly tremble along with the obscure, complicated, and profound circulation method, and began to undergo some subtle changes. Although he had never truly cultivated this cultivation method, the power contained within the cultivation method had already begun to guide the power in his body to undergo some sort of subtle transformation under the guidance of his aura. This transformation had only just begun, and it only caused the power in his body to change in a certain way. However, it was enough for the Baishur leader to feel indescribably relaxed. The lingering feeling of his lifespan slipping away with every passing moment was instantly alleviated by more than half. It really is profound. The Baishur leader was overjoyed, and his eyes shone brightly. I've just comprehended it, and it already has such a miraculous effect. The life-prolonging heavenly art is definitely a path of longevity at the peak of the heavenly realm. It's a great fortune for my clan to be able to meet an immortal. The Baishur leader's heart was filled with gratitude towards Luo Fan. After these thoughts, he calmed down and continued to comprehend the life-prolonging heavenly art. Not long after, many figures came from afar using various methods to arrive outside the warehouse. The power contained within these figures was unparalleled. At the very least, they were on par with the Baishur leader. The strongest among them was more than 100 times stronger than the Baishur leader. He stood there like a towering mountain, making others feel insignificant. However, in contrast to the power within their bodies, these figures were all old and frail. They were like candles flickering in the wind, unable to rise again at any moment. If Luo Fan were here, he would be able to tell at a glance that although these people were unbelievably powerful, they were almost at the end of their lives. Every single one of them was relying on all sorts of natural treasures to keep them alive. If those treasures were to break one day, they wouldn't be able to live past the next day. They were clearly the elders of the White Eater tribe. There were more than 100 times more guards outside the warehouse than before. The security was so tight that even the elders wouldn't dare to rashly charge in. At this moment, the Baishur leader seemed to sense something. He suppressed his desire to continue comprehending and casually grabbed at the ground. The ground swelled up and instantly formed a steel house. It enveloped the hundreds of thousands of words and diagrams, isolating them from the outside world. After that, he walked out of the warehouse. Under the respectful and excited gazes of the guards, he welcomed the dozens of elders into the warehouse. As for why he had to protect the life-prolonging heavenly art, it was because it was too precious. Although the patriarch of the Baishur clan cared about the entire clan and had asked Luo Fan for this cultivation method so that the Baishur clan could be passed on forever, it did not mean that he wanted to teach this cultivation method to the entire clan as soon as he obtained it. If he did so, the result would definitely be chaos, and it might even lead to the destruction of the entire clan. How could the patriarch of the Baishur clan, who had been the patriarch for hundreds of years, not know this? That was why the steel house had appeared. What happened next was very simple. After the Baishur leader explained the situation, the elders who had reached the end of their lifespans were overjoyed. They couldn't wait to comprehend the life-prolonging heavenly art and extend their lives. As a result, the efficiency of the meeting was unprecedentedly fast. On that day, an extremely strict and complicated set of rules and regulations were drawn up. Chapter 582. Over the next few decades, the races that bordered the White Eaters suddenly realized that the White Eaters that they could occasionally see had suddenly disappeared from their sight. If it were not for the fact that countless fortifications were being built around the White Eaters, they might have thought that the entire White Eaters had been wiped out for some reason. However, although they knew that the White Eaters were building fortifications around the White Eaters, none of the races could actually see a single White Eater. Even if the White Eaters had been doing something there a moment ago, when members of the other races arrived, they would discover that the White Eaters had suddenly disappeared without a trace. Such a strange change puzzled many races. However, even if they were puzzled, these races did not mobilize too much power to find the answer. At the end of the day, the heavenly realm was vast and filled with danger. These races had yet to settle their own matters. As long as it did not affect them, they did not have the leisure to care about what the other races were doing. Decades passed like this. One day, a strange circular light shield suddenly appeared 10 million miles away from where the White Eaters resided, enveloping the entire area within 10 million miles of where the White Eaters resided. The light barrier was very profound. There were countless complex and mysterious runes flowing rapidly on its surface. Even though there were many of these runes, they were not secrets. Instead, they were just ordinary cultivation runes that were widely circulated in the heavenly realm. But even if it was an ordinary cultivation talisman, after being stacked with countless layers and expending countless precious materials, its power had reached an unimaginable level. It was enough to isolate all spying and prevent all existences whose strength was less than 10,000 times that of a Jindan Dao master from entering. What happened to the White Eaters? Why do they seal themselves like this? It looks like they're going to isolate themselves from the world. It's so strange. Similar exclamations of surprise came from the various races. As time passed, it continued to lengthen. In just a few years, almost all the 800 astrals in the heavenly realm knew about the abnormality that had happened to the White Eaters. It caused a huge reaction that did not die down for decades. However, this effect only lasted for a few decades. Over time, the 800 astrals slowly got used to the abnormalities of the White Eaters and gradually forgot about the situation before the White Eaters had gone into seclusion. Another few hundred years passed. After the 800 spirit tribes had been replaced, the White Cannibal tribe was slowly forgotten. In the end, they became a legendary tribe that only existed in the records. Of course, all of these changes would happen in the future. On this day, Luo Fan left the White Eater tribe and threw the matter of the White Eater tribe to the back of his mind. To him, he had already achieved his objective in this trip to the Witeater tribe. Anything that happened in the Witeater tribe was meaningless to him, so he naturally wouldn't pay any more attention to it. At this moment, he was heading somewhere in the heavenly realm. That was where the inexplicable feeling from the gold core in Gooden's body was. Godan had ascended to the heaven realm naturally, but he had constructed the Ascension Rune formation and torn open the barrier of the heaven realm to enter the heaven realm. The difference between the two was like holding a passport to leave the country and smuggling in. Although they both entered the heaven realm, the places they appeared in were not the same. It was because of this difference that Luo Fan appeared near the settlement of the White Eater tribe and did not see a single cultivator. If Buddha Lu wanted to understand the heaven realm, the best way was naturally to understand the state of the cultivators in the heaven realm. That was why he had made this trip. Along the way, countless thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind like bolts of lightning. These thoughts were extremely numerous and contained countless runes. As he hurried along, he analyzed the essence and mysteries of the giant rune formation that opened up the heaven realm. The rune formation was constructed by someone who was suspected to be a saint and contained the profound mysteries of the Great Path. Even with Luo Fan's cultivation at the peak of primordial unity, he could not easily comprehend it. But although he could not completely comprehend the mysteries of the great path contained in the rune formation, as he comprehended it, he slowly understood some of the more superficial principles. Among them, there were some space-time rules of the heaven realm. At the moment he comprehended the space-time rules, the rainbow that Luo Fan transformed into suddenly shook and instantly merged into the void. In an instant, he crossed an unknown number of millions of miles and indirectly appeared at the foot of a mountain near the center of the heaven realm. The rainbow turned, and Luo Fan's figure condensed again. After condensing, Luo Fan's eyes revealed a quiet understanding, and there were countless runes pouring out from the depths of his pupils. It took a long time before they completely faded. After the runes faded, Luo Fan let out a long breath, and a faint smile appeared on his face. I see. It seems that the space-time in the heaven realm is so mysterious. Although the space-time in the heaven realm was extremely stable, there were still some strange rules that could be called loopholes. These rules made the space-time in the heaven realm very close to the cultivators who cultivated the Golden Core path. This kind of affinity allowed the Golden Core masters to unleash power that was thousands of times greater than the outside world in the heaven realm. If this affinity, coupled with the extremely dense postnatal chi of the heaven realm in the heaven realm, it was enough to greatly slow down the aging of the Golden Core masters. According to Luo Fan's calculations, if they lived in this heaven realm, the lifespan of the Golden Core masters would at least be more than 100 times longer than in the outside world. In other words, in the outside world, the Golden Core cultivators could at most live for 3,000 years. In this heaven realm, the Golden Core cultivators could at least live for 300,000 years. 300,000 years, coupled with the fact that the flow of time in this heaven realm was 365 times slower than in the outside world. Compared to the time in the outside world, the Golden Core masters could live for 109. 5 million years in this heaven realm, which was so long that any ordinary person would be dazzled. Although Luo Fan would spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, or even hundreds of millions of years in seclusion in the small Kiliacosm, he would think that 100 million years was nothing. In reality, 5,000 years was enough for a race to develop from a primitive lifestyle to the interstellar era. How many 5,000 years were there in 100 million years? In this way, one could see exactly how long a period of over 100 million years was. Chapter 583. Chapter 623. The Three Flowers. Although Luo Fan was not a Taoist master of Jindan stage, but with his cultivation realm, Jindan stage basically had no secret to him. As long as he thoroughly understood the affinity of this heavenly boundary with Taoist masters of Jindan stage, he had countless ways to do things that only Taoist masters of Jindan stage could do. Floating in the void, his thoughts moved slightly, and he stepped into the void. In an instant, his body fused with the void, and the void of the entire heavenly realm went through some kind of subtle and mysterious change, bringing him across an unknown distance of billions of miles in an instant. He appeared in a place with mountains and rivers that were completely different from the other parts of the heavenly realm. Luo Fan appeared, looked around, and instantly determined that this must be the place where cultivators gathered. One of the reasons was that there were countless auras of varying strengths hidden in the mountains and rivers. But the most important reason was that the nature of the mountains and rivers, and even this part of the world, was vastly different from other parts of the heavenly realm. Although the acquired Yuan Qi here was richer than the Yuan Qi in other parts of the realm, it was only at the level of the stronger Yuan Qi in other parts of the realm. Seriously speaking, there was no essential difference. But that was not the basis of Luo Fan's judgment. What really made Luo Fan certain that this was the place where the cultivators gathered was the space within an unknown radius of this area. Every inch of space in this area was constantly undergoing some kind of profound and subtle change. Occasionally, groups of runes would appear out of nowhere in any part of the void. These runes were very familiar to Luo Fan. They were the runes that formed the huge formation. These runes did not appear one by one, but were interwoven together in different numbers, appearing in groups. Some of these groups of runes contained incomparably profound principles, fused with the great Tao, and contained unimaginable power. Some of them were just a bunch of numbness, without any meaning or power. They were chaotic to the extreme. It could be said that the first type of rune was the manifestation of the essence of the heavenly realm. For cultivators, it was an opportunity to directly face the grand Tao. If they could comprehend the mysteries within, their cultivation would greatly increase, and their cultivation would also greatly improve. If a cultivator focused his energy on the second type, it would only cause his realm to become unstable or even regress. If it was more serious, he might even suffer from chi deviation and lose his mind. Although there were two types of rune combinations that appeared randomly in the void, the probability of them appearing was not the same. The probability of the former type appearing was much higher than the latter. After all, these runes were naturally manifested under some rules of the realm, and the appearance of each type of rune was caused by some kind of change in the formation formed by 500 billion runes. Under such circumstances, the combination of these runes naturally carried the mysteries of the formation, and it was naturally compatible with the mysteries of the great Tao. Only in very, very rare circumstances would there be a situation where the runes would randomly combine and manifest. After all, it was not the result of a formation, so it was naturally more difficult to appear. With the appearance of these runes, this area could be said to be a holy land for cultivators, giving them the opportunity to easily improve their cultivation. This kind of opportunity, compared to the risk, could be said to be not even worth mentioning. It was because of this that Luo Fan instantly determined that this area must be the gathering place of the cultivators. With a thought, Luo Fan carefully sensed the mysterious reaction from Gooden's golden core, and found that Gooden was in a location tens of millions of kilometers away. With Luo Fan's understanding of the affinity between the heavenly boundary and Jindan Taoist masters, it was only a matter of a thought for him to cross the distance of tens of millions of miles. Thus, with a thought, his figure merged into the void, and in an instant, he arrived at where Gooden was. This place was an extremely grand and vast building complex. At this time, the building complex was built using materials that were extremely rare even in the realm. Incomparably sturdy was only the most basic characteristic. There were also many natural characteristics that could condense the natural yuan qi of the universe. After the buildings were formed, they would form a very strange and profound formation that had the ability to condense yuan qi and runes. It was because of these various characteristics that the natural yuan qi of the universe around the building complex was more than 1,000 times denser than outside the building complex. Moreover, the frequency and number of runes flashing in the building complex was more than 1,000 times faster than outside. With Luo Fan's eyesight, he could even easily see that the frequency of the flashing seemed to have been filtered, and there was no meaning in it. The number of runes that randomly assembled was more than 100 times less than outside. For the realm, this location could be said to be an extremely rare holy land for cultivation. Although Luo Fan did not think much of it at all, Luo Fan's thoughts moved slightly, and in an instant, everything in this building complex was brought into his senses. So this is where the so-called heavenly court is located. After sensing everything in the building complex, Luo Fan's eyes lit up, and a look of understanding appeared on his face. This building complex covered an area of tens of thousands of square miles. There were hundreds of thousands of cultivators in it. Moreover, the cultivators with the lowest cultivation level had cultivated to the gold core realm, and the cultivators with the highest cultivation level had reached a level comparable to the realm of perfected immortals. It's really amazing to be able to achieve the realm of perfected immortals in this kind of environment. Luo Fan could sense a cultivator who seemed to be refining elixirs somewhere in the building complex. He could not help but exclaim inwardly. The yuan qi in this realm was the acquired yuan qi of the universe, which was many levels lower than the innate yuan qi and the chaotic yuan qi in the untainted world. Even in the untainted world, the innate gods who could achieve the realm of perfected immortals were less than 1 in 100. From this, it could be seen how rare it was to achieve the realm of perfected immortals in this realm. With a thought, Luo Fan's figure directly came to the alchemy room. The alchemy room had an area of 1,000 feet, and in the center stood a huge alchemy furnace that was 49 feet tall and engraved with the pattern of the Tai Chi 8 trigrams. Below the alchemy furnace, countless runes were weaving, drawing the endless acquired yuan qi of the universe in the void, forming a pure yang flame that emitted infinite heat, constantly burning the alchemy furnace. Within the furnace, there was a faint fragrance wafting out. Next to the alchemy furnace, an old man in a Taoist robe with a white beard sat cross-legged with a horsetail whisk in his hand. The Taoist closed his eyes slightly, occasionally waving the horsetail whisk, and there was a kind of innate power that appeared out of nowhere. It either stimulated the pure yang flame, changed a certain quality of the pure yang flame, weakened the flame, or changed the shape of the flame, and so on. Above the Taoist's head, there was a cloud with a circumference of 30 feet, constantly emitting a kind of Tao rhyme that was compatible with heaven and earth. Above the cloud, there were 3 white lotuses floating, sometimes blooming, sometimes closing. Between the blooming and closing, there were endless runes weaving, as if they were evolving some kind of principle, some kind of magic.